All right, those coming in through the door seems to have trickled. Seems to have slowed to a trickle. So we'll get started. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are today, everybody. And welcome to Shaping the Future, addressing gender-based violence, the Sustainable Development Goals, and Canada's path forward. My name is Amy Robichaud. My pronouns are she, her, and elle. I'm the CEO of Mothers Matter Canada, and I'm thrilled to be welcoming you to today's event and acting as your MC for today. Before we start, I want everyone to know about the accessibility feature that we do have available on Zoom. Please feel free to turn on the Zoom captions and set the captions to the language of your choice so that you can follow along in your preferred language or just using the captions. I see that we have posted the instructions on how to do so in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us today, each and every one of you, with support from the Department of Women and Gender Equality, as well as the Department of Employment and Social Development Canada. We're going to explore the critical ties between sustainable development, gender-based violence prevention, and gender equality as a cornerstone of Canada's future stability and thriving as a country. Please note that this event is being recorded and that Anna Lee from Drawing for Change will be illustrating the critical highlights of today's event, and we'll be sharing that illustration as we move following today's event. Each and every one of your presence in this room today is a powerful reminder that change begins when we unite to confront injustice, demand better for ourselves, our families, and our communities. We're gathering today during the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which makes us part of a global movement. From November 25th, the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, all the way to December 10th, Human Rights Day. These 16 days really serve as a call to action. They remind us of the urgent need to address violence in all of its forms and to recognize it as a violation of fundamental human rights. For Mothers Matter Canada, these 16 days resonate deeply. We know that mothers are the backbone of families, the nurturers of future generations, and the catalysts for change in their communities. Yet too many mothers and women face the shadow of violence. It is violence that isolates, silences, diminishes the incredible potential for women to lead, thrive, and contribute fully to society. But we also know the truth. We know that when women are safe, when mothers are supported, and that when communities rally together like ours is doing today to protect and uplift them, incredible things happen. We know that families heal, children grow stronger, and societies flourish. The 16 days of activism is not just a time to reflect. It is actually and fully a time for us to act. It's a time to reaffirm our commitment to creating safe spaces, whether they be in homes, in schools, in workplaces, or public spaces. It's a time to educate ourselves and others. It's a time to challenge harmful norms, dismantle systems that perpetuate violence and inequality. And I am so thrilled to have us all joining together today to do so. We are gathering today on ancestral and Indigenous lands. In particular, for Mothers Matter Canada, our central offices are located on the ancestral and unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Musqueam nations. Mothers Matter Canada, however, does recognize that our programs and this event is reaching communities across Turtle Island through each and every one of you and our valued program delivery partners. I also want to acknowledge the harm that is caused by colonialism to Two-Spirited and Indigenous women, and Mothers Matter Canada, in doing so, actively chooses to uplift Indigenous voices. I would be remiss not to acknowledge that intimate partner violence and violence in general affects our peers who are Indigenous women or who identify as such significantly higher and at a disproportionate level than the rest of the population when put together, and that is unacceptable, uncalled for, and must be remedied. And I know the work that we are going to do together today and that we all go back to do in our individual lives and activism will contribute to a solution on that point. It is my absolute honor today to introduce Deborah Baker, who is an elder in training and will be providing us with a welcome to territory. Deborah is from the Squamish Nation and is with us today at the opening of our event. Her ancestral name is Kaana, and she is the mother of 5 adult children and 1 amazing adult granddaughter, which to me is just the most amazing accomplishment altogether. Look at how much knowledge you have passed into this world and continue to share, Deborah. Elder in training Deborah is a residential school survivor who recently completed and graduated from the SFU MBA program. Congratulations, what another massive accomplishment. And she strongly believes in the spirit of reconciliation. I've had the pleasure of working with Deborah and getting to know her over a couple different roles, and I can absolutely honestly attest that your impact, leadership, and generational knowledge that you share, Deborah, is transforming the community that we share together here in Vancouver. And I'm so grateful to have you with us today. Thank you for joining.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everything that you just shared. And on Hot Squalls, it's a beautiful day. Just really want to welcome you to the shared territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Currently reside on the village of Oslahan, which is also known as Capilano on the North Shore. I really believe in the work that Mother Matters does to support women and children, and continues the advocacy and the networking to provide that support. So on this beautiful day, as we're all gathered together to have these discussions, I'm so grateful, and I thank our Creator for bringing us together. I just wanted to share a song with you, which is called Greeting of the Day, which is also known as Aunt Sally's song. It's a spiritual song, and for those of you who know it, please feel free to join me. And I send lots of love and prayers to those of you who may be struggling or grieving right now for the loss of a loved one, or celebrating life to the fullest because of your achievements, your successes, and just everything that you do to contribute to yourself, to your family, to your community. So with that, I'm going to share this song. I hope it sounds okay. I just made this drum, and I'm so proud of it. I gifted it to my son, but he hasn't had a chance to use it, so I'm helping it gather some experience. Whoa, 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 he, ho, he, yo, ho, 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 he, yo, ho, hey, whoa, whoa, whoa. Oh, he, oh, 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 he, oh, he, oh, 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 he, oh, he, oh, eh, ah, eh, ah. Ooh. Osia, Chankomatome, hold up my hands to each and every one of you, and I send my good vibes and my feelings, my teachings, Nanath, and everything that can help you continue doing the good work that you do. All my relations. Osia.
Thank you so much, Deborah. We appreciate it so much. And thank you for allowing us to be part of witnessing you putting even more wisdom and experience into the gift you've made for your son in that drum. Please spend the time with us today that you feel is valuable to you. And we also are so gracious that you've spent this time with us already. I am thrilled now to pass the microphone, as it is, over to Yusra Kadir, who's the Chief Program and Advocacy Officer at Mothers Matter Canada, and the absolute partner in everything that we do here from my desk. It could not be done without Yusra. Yusra today is going to introduce herself briefly, and then she'll be our moderator for our first of our two panels, which is Canada and the 2030 agenda and the Agenda 2030, an inside story. So Yusra, over to you.
Thank you so much, Amy. Hi, everybody, and welcome. My name is Yusra. I'm the Chief Program Officer for the Mothers Matter Canada, and what a privilege it is to welcome you all to our first panel titled Canada and Agenda 2030, an Inside Story. We will introspectively discuss Canada's journey towards achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. With only 6 years left until the 2030 deadline, the urgency to act has never been greater. The SDGs are not just an aspirational framework, they're a call to action demanding bold efforts to end poverty, reduce inequality, and protect the planet. So if we look at the global picture, 700 million people around the world still live in extreme poverty. 3 billion people lack access to basic sanitation, and one woman or girl is killed every 10 minutes by their intimate partner or family member. When we look at Canada, while we're doing relatively better than some other countries, the situation here is far from perfect. 1 in 7 Canadians live in poverty. It includes nearly 1.2 million children. Despite our wealth, over 4 million people struggle with basic needs like food, housing, and healthcare. Over 35,000 Canadians experience homelessness on any given night, and this includes half of this is Indigenous people, while they represent only 5% of our overall population. Gender-based violence remains a critical concern, and a woman or girl is killed every other day in Canada at the hands of her intimate partner or spouse. These statistics, they're not just numbers, they represent lives that are affected by systemic barriers and structural inequalities, and it is up to us to uplift them together. So our panel today will explore some critical questions like, how do we change this trajectory? How can we ensure that the most vulnerable groups are not left behind as we work towards these global goals? And I cannot wish for a better panel to join this discussion with me. We have an exceptional panel of leaders who are at the forefront of advancing SDGs in Canada. You can see the detailed speaker bios in the link provided on the chat, and I will start inviting the panelists to introduce themselves. Please join me in welcoming Katelynne Herchak, Head of Decolonial Policy, Strategy, and Kinship and VIDEA. Katelynne, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Hi, everybody. So Uluku Elispiangava and Anna Kamilgan and Anna Eva Adams Kudrak Luchiunga and Anna Kanakahaga. So good day, my friends. My name is Katelynne Herchak. I'm Inuk from Kudrak, Quebec, and ranked in the Nunavut. I am residing on Kanakahaga territory. You might wonder, where is she? And why does it look dark and scary? I am in the basement of the Faculty of Law at McGill. I'm in my first year. And I have a background in geography, justice studies, and first was trained as an Indigenous family support worker. I'm happy to spend the afternoon with you all.
Thanks, Katelynne. I would like to welcome Katrin Kohl, who's the co-chair of the UNESCO Chair in Reorienting Education Towards Sustainability at the York University. Katrin, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, hi everyone. It's a pleasure being here. I'm joining today from the traditional lands of Toronto, Treaty 13, and I wish to acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Great First Nation. Yeah, it's a pleasure. I'm an academic at a university, and I've always been fascinated by the role of education, because education not only in a way of prosperous livelihoods, understanding the world out there, it can make such a difference in our lives. And at the same time, the world has so much knowledge available, yet we're not always acting upon what we know, and we act against our better knowledge. So that's kind of my perspective that I want to bring to the discussion today. Again, happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Katrin. Please join me in welcoming Candice Kotchapaw, founder and executive director of Developing Young Leaders of Tomorrow Today. Candice, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. Such a pleasure to be here as well. Really excited for this conversation. So, as the founder and executive director of DYLOTT for short, I know it's a long name. My work focuses on the engagement of Black youth across Canada, particularly related to the education to employment outcomes of Black youth, especially as we navigate the pillar of development in the first international decade for people of African descent at the UN level. And I joined today from a social work perspective. I am a graduate of the Master of Social Work program at York, and really looking at how systemic issues influence individuals and communities. And so I come at this from the lens of the achievement of the SDGs from an Afrocentric perspective, and looking at how the macro level really influences the micro engagement. Looking forward to the talk today.
Thanks so much, Candice. And last but not the least, don't think that all the women panelists, we've put our male colleague at the last, but on a global mean, Suman, you're going to be okay. So please join me in welcoming Suman Roy, founder and executive director of the Scarborough Food Security Initiative. Suman, over to you.
Thanks a lot, Yusra, and thanks Mothers Matter Canada for organizing this. It's a pleasure to represent Feed Scarborough Food Security Initiative, bringing the lens of food security into this conversation. We all know, we have seen reports from various organizations across the country on the problem of food insecurity and how it's touching almost every neighborhood and some of your neighbors who is attending this. But also there's a huge lens of inequity when it comes to food insecurity in Canada. And we see that. We serve, in our organization, we serve around 8,500 community members every week, out of which over 50% is women and 25% is children. So it is very evident where the issues lie. So I'm bringing that lens to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Suman. So we want the conversation today to be really organic and really tackle some practical issues and come out with some tangible solutions for the community of practice we've gathered here today. Before I delve into the questions, I'd like to let everybody know that all our panelists today were part of Canada's official delegation to the high-level political forum on the SDGs that took place in July in New York. So I want to start with Katelynne. And Katelynne, would you like to share with us what sustainable development goal do you primarily work on? And in your analysis, where does Canada stand in terms of progress on that SDG?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So I predominantly work with Indigenous women and girls. I led a project a year and a half ago supporting particularly Inuit women and First Nations women in the Northern Territories, in Nunavut, and the Yukon and WT on accessing positions of leadership. And I do a lot of like youth mentorship with, predominantly with women and gender diverse folks, because VIDEA is made up predominantly of women and gender diverse folks, as well as youth. And so that's like the intersection of my work, as well as we do add like a climate lens to things, because we do know that gender diverse folks and women often face the most violence in the time of climate crisis. And so what I feel what is missing is sometimes is that connection and that understanding that, like as an Indigenous woman, like my connection to my territory is very important. And so like we can't talk about development projects or, sustainable development and the climate as things that are separate. Like I feel that when it comes to gender equality work and working with folks of different genders, it's more than just people. It really comes to kinship, and like being in relationship with things that are more than human is really important, and recognizing like the role that they have in the work that we're trying to achieve, and the fact that we don't actively listen to them, because I think we have forgotten how to listen to things that don't speak English or French or languages that we all communicate with, but really like sitting and listening to the water and the land to really understand the moves that we need to do to make the world a better place. And and to really recognize that everybody has their gifts and has contributions, and everyone in the holistic sense, you know? And that's what I try to focus on and try to work with young people and understanding like the teaching of like you don't know where you come from if you don't know where you're like you don't know where you're going if you don't know where you come from. And it's so important to walk in a good way with our culture and to be in relationship with one another.
Mhm. Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Kate. And in what you shared, I think there's a great role on how the education piece unfolds. And I'd like to loop in Katrin here. So Katrin, do you want to share what SDG do you work on and where do we stand as Canada?
Yeah, thanks. And building on the piece of connection, I also believe that all the SDGs, all the topic that we are all working on in this group, they are so interrelated and connected. My focus is in particular SDG 4, the SDG 4 on education. And whereas most times when we discuss education, we think about access to education, getting children into school, getting everyone into a formal school setting. But what the UN is focusing more and more towards is the fact that the most educated countries are mostly the ones with the biggest ecological footprint. So just bringing people into more education will not help to shift our societies and to shift our work. That's why my focus is in particular in education for sustainable development. So thinking about what do we need to shift so those people that are the most educated are actually the strongest contributors to a sustainable future. In Canada, we traditionally do really well in bringing people into education and in sharpening the tools of reading, writing, mathematics. So we have really sharp tools. Where there's room for improvement is to consider the values again. What are we educating for? What is the role of a very educated person in society? And what can we do to help those who we don't want to leave behind? And where can we really make a difference? And that's the setting that we are in, and where it connects again to my colleagues here. You don't learn well if you don't have security of food. You don't learn well if you feel you belong to a group that is marginalized. You don't learn well if the curriculum that you're exposed to is not relevant for your situation and for your life. So we all really have something to work together, and we all bring our perspectives to a more holistic piece, and that is a central work of education, bringing that all together. Thank you.
Thanks, Katrin. So I see already the trickling of people and planet, and I'm sure we'll get to prosperity as we move to our other speakers. It just tells us why holistic work and coming together is so important. So, Candice, what would you like to talk to us about the SDG you primarily focus on, and where does Canada stand?
For sure. And I think the organization of the speakers goes very, very well, because I also follow on the quality education piece, and particularly focus on working with youth of African descent who across Canada, we boast the highest rates of post-secondary attainment, both at the undergraduate, master, and PhD level. But the challenge that we have is that this high achievement in the post-secondary space does not translate to the economic outcomes that we know young people should be operating in. So what we're looking at is young people of African descent in particular experience upwards of 24% of an unemployment rate. So that's almost double the national average. And what we want to say when we're talking about the SDGs and SDG 4 in particular is that we work on a complementary basis. So the work that the Black Diplomats Academy does, which is one of the programs that I lead at DYLOTT, is that we focus on quality education through practical experience. So getting you into the job market that you went to school for, that you studied for, that, you know, when you graduate, you are coming out with enormous debt, and you need the job to pay off that debt and to make yourself economically sustainable. So we really prioritize SDG 4 on quality education through the achievement of SDG 8, which is decent work and economic growth. And we marry those two because they do go hand in hand. You see a better economic outcome if your education matches the career perspective that you are trying to push forward. And we also really think it's important to connect SDG 17, which is partnerships to achieve those goals. One industry cannot do it all. Governments can't do it all. So it's really important for corporate institutions, academia, civil society, and government to work together to achieve the outcomes that we're looking for in education, as well as the innovative employment space that we're looking for. And for Canada's progress, I feel that what we're seeing is that there's good progress going forward on highlighting the macro things that are happening, meaning the institution, you know, the whole of government approach is robust, and we feel that there's always more to do. For us, it's important to connect. It's important to utilize expertise that is in the space so that we're looking at a broad-based approach to addressing some of these challenges.
Thanks so much, Candice. It's interesting. I was looking at some statistics yesterday, and we saw that 1 in 4 women are in executive positions as leaders, but it's 1 out of 7 that these women are immigrants. And even in that, it's 4 times as likely that this 1 out of 7 women were born in the United Kingdom or United States, but they're still categorized as immigrants. So it's different, right? When you talk about race and color and ethnicity, there's a lot of work to do. Communities are grappling with grassroots level issues. So I want to bring in Suman here, who works with the most basic of needs, that's food. So Suman, we kind of can guess which SDG do you primarily target, but tell us about where Canada is at.
Thanks a lot. Yes, you're absolutely correct. SDG 2, Zero Hunger, is what we kind of focus on, but we know for sure we cannot get to SDG 2 unless a whole bunch of other SDGs are at work. And that is the interesting part of the Sustainable Development Goals, that they're so interrelated. So, of course, we can't get to SDG 2 without SDG 1, which is no poverty. And then, of course, the good health and well-being, the gender equity, the decent work and economic growth, reduce inequalities. These are a few which is very key to our work. And without all this, we cannot achieve zero hunger. So that is kind of one of the main things that we talk about. We are, as Canada, we are far from achieving that goal. We are, unfortunately, all of you see the number of people going into food banks and all keep on rising. However, the key factor that we should talk about is food insecurity, especially in Canada. It's not about food. There is a lot of other issues like proper employment, like proper education, like the inequities. All these actually work towards food insecurity in our community. So we are focusing a lot on those as we work. And of course, the grassroots, because I strongly feel that all the grassroots needs to really understand the importance of working in that framework of SDGs to grow that file.
Thanks so much, Suman. And you've started delving in deeper here. You know, you use the words inequities, and we're really starting to talk about structural issues, which is where we want to unravel and redo things sometimes. So I want to take us deeper into the disparities, because in Canada, I feel like we're a higher income country, and the problem we struggle with is disparity and how the people who are most vulnerable become invisible in our national aggregates. So Suman, we'll start with you this time around. What key disparities do you see? Who are the key vulnerable groups, and how can Canada serve them better? You're muted.
Sorry. So yeah, no, I figured it out. So as I said earlier, I think women and children are the two sectors which are very adversely affected, and also persons with disability. We are very fortunate that we have seen over the last few years a few government policies that came up to help the children, especially with the school food program that we all hear, with the dentist program, which the government have come up with. We have approved in principle the benefits of the disability benefits, but we want to see some more work in all of these policies to actually see some real impact. We are very lucky and we are very fortunate with the school food program, for example. But we often miss out the big chunk of the population who are working age. And that is something we are seeing currently. Around 40% of our clients have at least one full-time job and still not able to afford a living, afford food. And they come to our food bank. So that is a big sector and it is men, women, both, who are affected disappropriately. We haven't seen much policies come up to help the 18 to 64 bracket to move the needle. And that is where proper income security comes in, and more programs related to how to empower the communities to have a proper income is what we are looking at.
Thanks, Suman. It's interesting and very disturbing what you say, because this is the working age group that we look at to drive our economy and advance the SDGs for the country. So if this group isn't doing well, despite having a job, that means really we have a lot more work to do than we see at the outset. So thank you for highlighting that. Candice, do you want to take this a little bit further and talk about disparities in certain groups and how can we want to bring some solutions as well. So how can we serve these groups better?
Absolutely. So again, really happy that this conversation is happening, because I think one of the challenges that I'm facing with youth in particular, so our constituency is youth, and the challenge that is most predominant is the lack of knowledge about the SDGs. Bar none, it's difficult to address a problem. Excuse me. It's difficult to address a problem when you don't even know that the problem exists. And for us, there are 17 goals, and most communities don't even know that these goals exist. Most communities have not had the time investment to explain what are the SDGs and how do they impact you first and foremost, but then also how do you interact with these SDGs? How does the work that you are engaging in connect with the SDGs? We see that especially for Black youth, so the constituents we serve the most, Black youth specifically don't feel that that they have a connection or own a stake in the achievement of the SDGs here in Canada, because first and foremost, they feel like there are other issues affecting them directly that prevents them from caring about what is happening in Canada. When I don't have access to food myself personally, I really don't care if I'm going to post-secondary institution. I have to deal with my basic needs at this point. And so what we're seeing on the ground level is that there is a disconnect. There is a knowledge disconnection. And further to that, there is a lack of implementation of the SDGs, visibly allowing communities to understand the progress that needs to be made. We hear the 2030 agenda, and for those of us who work in this space, we understand what that means. But for people who have no connection to the SDG, no stake in it, it is irrelevant for them. And what I see as a potential way forward is that grassroots organizations, I think on a natural level, take up the responsibility of doing that knowledge mobilization, but that we're also pivoting quickly to connect the SDGs to the work that we're doing, figuring out, okay, how do I label what I'm doing as an SDG target or an indicator of progress, and then prove to the different stakeholders of how we're achieving those different missions and goals. And right now, for us, when we think about, potential progress, disparities for sure, we know that, case in point, for the Black Youth Action Plan in Ontario, it's the only one that exists in the entire country. And it is not necessarily connected to the SDGs by any means. So for us to really drill down into what are those practical actions that need to happen, those issues that affect communities directly, if there is only one example within a province, within the whole entire country, you see the uphill battle that organizations have to, the heavy weight that organizations bear to try to bring in the stakeholders that need to be engaged. So that's, I think, on the surface, there's the micro challenge, the individual challenge of connecting with the SDGs and understanding what the SDGs are and what they mean for me as an individual. But there's also the meso level, so the community level, communities who are struggling with homelessness, who are struggling with lack of good employment, who are struggling with affordability challenges, so you can't even afford groceries. And then there's also the broader macro. So what is happening within the institutions, what is happening within government, what is happening within the financial system. All of those things are pressurizing the disparities that exist within vulnerable communities.
Thanks, Candice. I think you made some really important points here, and maybe I'll go next to Kate, because the communities that are struggling to meet their basic needs, they really cannot afford or don't care, what they want to call it, the SDGs, prosperity, Agenda 2030, and then there's something to be said about colonialism in it, like who says who's left behind, what measures that you're in target or you're out of target. So these are really deep discussions that we need to look into. So maybe Kate, I will bring you in on this to talk about disparities and how we can serve vulnerable groups better.
For sure. Those are all excellent points. And just like listening to my friends speak of like, yes, like my friends in the circle here and also like my friends and my family of like, we don't use this language. This language is not important to us. In the way of like, oh, like my cousin is a brilliant hunter. She harvests caribou. And I'm like, oh, that's SDG, whatever. And like my cousin Riley could care less. And that's completely okay. But it's like, it's practicing culture, it's living off our land, it's living our ways that has sustained our culture and our people for thousands of years. And we don't need folks coming in to tell us, oh, like this is the SDG that you're working on. And also like the other side of that is like, okay, we need to be able to translate this language to be able to fund programs that happen in the North. And those types of things. And also I'm gonna go back to Suman's point of like taking off my decolonial girl hat and bringing it down a little bit to help folks understand where I'm coming from a little bit more, is that like my dad's a 60 scoop survivor, and my mom is non-Indigenous, and my parents split up when I was very young. My mom remarried. And I have a bunch of siblings in the light of my life. But my youngest sibling is actually autistic, and he is high functioning, but nonverbal. And so like the degree of witnessing my parents, all of my parents trying to pull together to understand Jaden's needs and realizing that like I'm almost neurotypical. I got some stuff. And also like my other brother has ADHD, and then my youngest brother being autistic, and recognizing how my parents had to navigate a system in which they were so unfamiliar with. And like they're not quite young, but they were young, like they're in their 30s when they had Jaden. And like then the amount of forethinking that had to go into our family to plan for Jaden's life to have a happy, successful, loving life is something that like folks don't understand unless you have to do it. And like folks won't think of people with disabilities unless they're in the room. And so I really do think that restructuring the way in which we value knowledge and value expressions of knowledge and how people see the world, because I really do think it's really beautiful. Like I watch a lot of TikToks, obviously, and like the Maori have like a word in their language for people who are autistic that translates to people in their own space and time. And in Western culture and society, we don't value that because you're not typical, and you're not invited to be in these spaces and make these kinds of decisions. And so I really do think that we need to have more spaces for people with disabilities to be decision makers and how things need to happen and be accessible. I think that's something that is very much a strength at VIDEA. We hire folks who are autistic, who are on wide range of spectrums with their journeys and their learning journeys, and are in positions of power within the organization. To say like, this is something that's inaccessible, this is something that's accessible, and like building their own programs and supporting the wider organization as a whole, which is such a gift. And actually like we need to highlight that more. If there's people in position of powers who think differently. And that's something that actually to be celebrated and not to be feared. And would it be such a more interesting place? And wouldn't we have such more interesting conversations? And instead of having the same conversation of how can we be more inclusive, then rather just doing it.
Thanks so much, Kate. And really, it does speak to putting people in the center and being human-centered and looking at people as whole humans, not just have one trait identifying them. What a beautiful interjection. So with this, I'm going to loop in Katrin. And Katrin, maybe you can pick up some things on how we can mainstream and make education more inclusive for some of the things that Kate has highlighted, as well as the other panelists. So you want to reflect a little bit on the disparities and how we...
Yeah, no, and I'd love to pick this up because we currently live in a world that judges the outcomes of education and also often the value of a human being by being best at and being the best or being the leading instead of considering the best for. Who am I with my degree and all of my Western achievements in my resume that I can cite? Who am I for my community? Where am I really making a difference in the community? And I think those contributions are often not valued in the same way. What do I have of 25 publications and all of that, speaking as an academic, if I haven't tried at least to make a difference in my community? And this is also goes back to the learning in the classroom. As I said, we should keep sharpening the skills. We're trying to make kids and young people, make them functioning in a world that is so dysfunctional, instead of realizing that all knowledge is relevant, and we are not valuing knowledge in the same way. We are valuing often the knowledge in the textbooks more than the knowledge of the local community, although that can give us much more relevance, much more connections, and can help us much more. There's a challenge in creating, and that again leads to disparities, because if the knowledge isn't relevant that is transmitted in the classroom, kids check out of the learning. So bringing that together often disadvantages those who are not directly from the community, such as refugees, indigenous, and immigrant children who don't have the same connections. And in the same way, a group that we often completely forget because we think of education informal systems, we forget the whole piece of lifelong learning, all the people that are in our country that are doing the hard work, that don't have much opportunity in educating themselves, because pretty much the only thing they have a right to is like health and safety training. But how is our health and safety not secured if we're not learning about sustainability, if we're not understanding climate change, if we're not understanding those broader issues and give people the opportunity to learn about them, to become stronger human beings, and in the same way become stronger contributors to the economy that we still have to pursue in order to survive.
Thanks. Nothing gives my heart more joy than hearing an academic talk in tangible community, things that we can understand and actually be willing to bridge that divide. So hats off to you for that. I'm
Yeah,
I'm going to club a couple questions here because I think we did touch on some critical gaps, but I want to ask you guys a difficult question about what stands in our way. So if you look at your experience and your work and where we want to take this work, what is the barrier? What stands in your way? And if you want to add a good practice or a solution that has worked in addressing that. So give us your barrier and your solution so we can all learn from it. So maybe I'll start with Candice this time.
For sure. So I wrote three things down for this with this question, but I think I can wrap it up in one. I could say I think the thing that stalls progress so far is consultation with an outcome of intentional implementation. And what I mean by that is it is fine to host multiple consultations about what we want to see happen. However, just based on this conversation alone, the snapshot of in a moment in time is after we're done talking, what do we do? After we're done planning and writing and doing all of the studies and printing all this beautiful magazines and these report cards and checking off boxes to say, yes, we did this. We heard from 1,000 people out of 30,000. That is not truly representative of what is actually happening. After we've done all these things, what do we do next? What do we do to ensure that the voices of those who are typically excluded are not included in some of these consultations? What do we do with those people who think and learn differently than we do normally? What do we do about making sure that they are not continuously left out of the conversation, and then that they're not continuously left out of the implementation where it really matters? It really matters for communities to feel like we are included, to feel like we have a stake, that we literally can add to the change that we want to see in our communities. So consultation with an outcome of intentional, meaning we mean to do it. It's not by accident. We didn't arrive, we didn't fall into it. We planned to get there. I think that's really, really important. And how do we do that? Is by making sure that we are not asking communities to fit into the box of what we believe is our SDGs, because not every community is going to understand, like we mentioned before. Not every community is working on an SDG framework like what we have with the HLP of the High Level Political Forum, that understanding. We need to create the systems that allow for local engagement to do the work without a label attached to it. Yeah.
Thanks, Candice. I will say, being from the Global South myself, that we can learn so much from the Global South on some of these pieces. The Global South is way ahead. So I think there's again work and intentional consultation that we need to be looking at. So I'll move it to Katrin. Katrin, what stands in the way and how do we get rid of the obstacle?
Yeah, and let me build on what Candice just said. And for everyone in the audience who just doesn't find themselves in one of the 17 topics that are simply the outcome of international negotiation, this was the consensus. There's, no one has to feel bad if you don't find yourself in the 17th, because this is just one of the action plans that is accompanying us between 2015 and until 2030. Sustainability needs to be localized. A just society needs to be localized. And if someone doesn't associate with the SDGs, that still doesn't make work that they're doing towards sustainability and towards better communities in any way less valuable or less important. And I think this is important to continue to say. In terms of education, one of the challenges, of course, is our system, having a federal level, having the provinces and territories, which always poses quite a challenge. But overall, what has been shown by a survey that was in 2022 by Learning for a Sustainable Future, an NGO here in Canada that works throughout the country, also shown by UNESCO that surveyed 58,000 educators around the world. One of the big obstacles is teachers, educators, they're not comfortable teaching about sustainability, about climate change, about global citizenship in the classroom, and also in the communities where they teach in non-formal education. This is a huge barrier to even bringing these topics into the classroom, and how to connect them to the local community, and how to specify what is relevant of sustainability. How does this come down in a city like Toronto, where we have little nature because we live in an urban environment? So how does this all translate? And one concrete idea that has been working well are, for example, regional centers of expertise. We have 7 in Canada, where educators work with all the experts in the community and inform their curriculum on an ongoing basis by Indigenous elders, by the NGOs, by civil society, and inform the curriculum in the way to, and so it is made sure that everything that is taught actually makes sense in the space that I'm in, and also includes the population of the space. As often, and then I'm going to stop talking, when I work with my international students here, most international students come with substantial knowledge of sustainability, including the SDGs. So we're an immigrant country. We have all of these people coming into the country, having all this knowledge, and we can benefit from that. So nurturing their empowerment, nurturing their sense of actually knowing so much more than maybe a person that is from here, and having that sense of confidence may make a huge difference. Thank you.
Thanks, Katrin. I think if Canada could crack one nut, that is harnessing the potential of the immigrants and international students that are here, I think we'd be fast tracking towards the SDGs. So I'm hearing a lot of power to the people and people in the center in your responses. Suman, how would you like to add to this conversation?
Sorry, when you said barrier, I ask you who's signing the checks? No, I'm just kidding. That's financial is a barrier, especially. But one thing that we need to really think about and understand when we are going through the challenges we are going through due to economic reasons, due to political reasons, due to wars in different parts of the world, the community is thinking about today. Community is thinking about tomorrow. They are not thinking about 2030. They are not thinking about SDGs because that doesn't really mean anything to them. There is, if you go down in the community, door to door, there is certainly a perception that, oh, UN means it's all theoretical. So there is that perception, especially in the global north. So people are not thinking in those lines. However, we as community organizations, it is our job, I feel, to understand the SDGs and align our programs with the SDGs, because the work is done, the framework is done. And the communities don't need to know always that, oh, we are following with the SDG footstep, but they can see the result. They can see with our programs, with how we behave as community organizations and how we align ourselves, we are making that impact, which is in the line of SDGs. So I think the knowledge of SDGs needs to certainly, and the buy-in of the SDGs certainly needs to start, in my mind, with the community grassroots organizations. As long as we are aligned and we work together, the community will reap the benefits. And that is the end goal of it.
Thanks so much, Suman. I know you used humor for it, but I will say funding remains a consistent and continued gap, and the waiting lists keep growing. And we need commitment, and we need to come around the table, but we do need funding to do that work. We're doing the government's job for them. So I think there's something to be said around that. I'm going to come to you, Kate, and we're talking barriers, and Suman said something beautiful that, instead of 2030 is composed of many todays and tomorrows. So why not speak the language of the community? And that's more people-centricness. So Kate, what's the barrier? How do we get rid of it?
All right, folks, I got a lot of thoughts and ideas. So in the summertime, I got to read a lot of books before I got locked in the McGill basement to read the Constitution. And I truly think, obviously, like it's very creating space for communities to come together and build solidarity with one another is so, so important to the achievement of this work. And also, I read a lot of feminist theories, and I think we have to mention that the backsliding is happening, and that is creating a massive, massive barrier for our kin all over the world and those who are not more than human. And I truly believe like really grounding ourselves in feminist practices can help us achieve what we're trying to do here. If you have feminist practices, people aren't hungry. You have feminist practices, the planet suffers less. You have feminist practices, missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls doesn't happen anymore because we're all in solidarity with each other and we're centering each other and thinking long term for our next generation. So I know it's a little bit of the theoretical, and I apologize. However, though, like it starts with relationships, it starts with changing minds, it's also talking to each other consistently, even when we disagree, to help find common ground.
Thanks, Kate. What a beautiful thought around tolerance and about listening. And you started your conversation with this as well, that we've forgotten how to listen to people and to the world around us. So I will throw a unique challenge to all our panelists, because I'm going to ask you for a key recommendation, one key recommendation that you think can help Canada create the inclusive and effective systems that we all want to achieve the SDGs. I just want to say, Kate, you're talking about feminism, and there was a post I saw yesterday and it said, do you believe that women should have the same rights as men? And if it's yes, then congratulations, you're a feminist. No, and it said, try again. So one recommendation to tie everything together to advance Canada towards the SDGs, and I will start with Kate.
Wow. I'm sorry if you hear people walkers and stuff. I'm like, where they are. I truly think a recommendation to help make Canada a better place, really at the end of the day, is what the question is um, to be kind, to be kind and to be compassionate. And a lot of the work that I do is from a trauma-informed place because being first trained as a family support worker, and to support families at the end of the day is something that's really important to me. And I think the ability to, yeah, just to sit and to listen to like what people are offering you. Like I'm offering you this medicine, I'm telling you my story, I'm telling you my thoughts and my opinions, and to have folks sit and honor that and share their good medicine too. I think really coming down to sharing and listening. And also my favorite thing to do is to tell the government, no, that's not good enough. Like, no, try again. In a good way, though. You can do that in a good way of like, thank you for this offer, and I think we can try something better together differently. Um, and so I think being strong in your convictions and being compassionate.
Thanks so much, Kate. I read this quote and it said, kindness is compassion and love in perfect harmony. And I think it is really important for us and our systems to also have kindness at the heart of everything that we do. I'll move now. Katrin, one recommendation.
Yeah, that's a hard one. I guess I would get some kind of prize if I knew how to do it. But my hope is My hope is that we can arrive in an ongoing dialogue with one another. I think the SDGs, when the SDGs came in many countries, that created the future we want. And that was a 3-year process. And I think what we really need is we need a continuous conversation about the future we want. That is, at this point, a framework are the SDGs. Beyond 2030, it may be a different one. But within Canada, we need to localize that, and we need to arrive at an ongoing conversation where there is not the hierarchical structure of being asked for a consultation and a punctual input, but a continuous conversation within all stakeholders of civil society. Where do we stand today? Where do we want to go? And we do have the means for that. We just haven't found a process yet in order to have this this conversation and this dialogue with one another, which would also lead to a whole different level of relationship building between all the different communities that within themselves are extremely strong. But we are not yet the country of communities, and within a community consisting of all these communities, and we're not quite bringing it together. And I think that's one of the big tasks that we have in the years to come.
Thanks, Katrin. I noticed the trend where, Kate talked about intentional consultation, and you're talking about how much of that consultation becomes voice that's heard or voice that really truly has an impact. So thank you for that. Suman, one recommendation that will fast track us for inclusive and effective systems.
I have a bad habit of never following instructions, so I'm going to give you 2. But I'll make it very quick. One that I strongly believe is we really need to be honest and identify the problem, which in many cases, and this is not only Canada, we see many countries when they're presenting, they're trying to show how good they are rather than really saying, we have a problem. We are not getting to 2030 by any shape or form. Let's really agree and understand that we have a problem. I think if you don't understand a problem, you can never find a solution. So let's be honest to ourselves on where we are and what is the problems. The second biggest recommendation that I have is we have some amazing champions within Canada on the SDGs. Let us identify them, empower them and let them do the job that they really want to do and make an impact. Let's not only just resource them, but give them the voice. And that is, I think, is one of the barriers that we lose the motivation of some of the champions who don't see a way out or way to move forward. So that is just my 2 recommendations.
Thank you, Suman. Lovely recommendations. Thanks for disrupting the system and innovating with 2. We appreciate that. We're walking the talk here, folks. So I just want to say that really, like, it's really inspiring to hear these things, and what you said, Suman, that would really build some bridges for Canada when we report on the SDGs as well. I think our systems are not talking to each other, and there's so much good work happening on the grassroots that we never get to report on, just because people don't call that work on the SDGs. Candice, your thoughts? Please just don't do 3 recommendations.
No, I won't do it. I realize that we're short on time. I love what Suman just said, and maybe I will caption it as well by saying we need to move away from slogans and politicizing Canadians, especially during periods where there is significant turbulence happening in our country. So, for example, during COVID, we came up with the slogan of leaving no one behind, because different communities were experiencing vaccine lack of availability for vaccines, and all of these different challenges were happening. And so we quickly gathered this idea, this trend that everybody could jump on to say, we're going to leave no one behind. Let's do a all of Canada approach to making sure that there's equity. Then there was the She Session, where women were leaving the workplace in droves, right? And so we labeled this as, we have to get more women back into the workplace and all of that. But which women were we thinking about? right? Were we actually thinking about women who are low income? Were we thinking about women who don't have children but are still experiencing gender-based violence? All of those things. Were we thinking about that? Now we're talking about the vibe session. And everyday people don't talk like that. Like, what does it mean to have a vibe session? Like, what does it mean that we are struggling? You know, we can't afford groceries, we can't afford to live, we can't afford those things. So we have to move away from just targeting and adding a label to something to make it sound like you're doing something when you're not doing anything at all, or that you're doing very limited amount of things. I think my recommendation, or the thing that we can do, is operationalize SDG 10, which is reduce inequalities across the board. We have to figure out what each community's inequalities that they're facing and address them where they are. We can't just use blanket statements to address a challenge. That is not a blanket. We have to address each individual square of that blanket. And that's how you achieve equity and inclusion and representation.
That's so good, really inspiring. And I can't think of better words in closing, Candice. I think your comments pulled it all together. It has been such an amazing, amazing conversation. And I know everybody on this call is incredibly busy and you have a million other things to do, but I am so grateful that you took time for sharing time and space with us, and sharing so honestly and so generously with Mothers Matter, as well as all our participants online. I have invited people to send questions in the chat. I already see there's a couple comments which we'll get to. So I just, as it gives time to people to put questions in the chat, I just want to say that I just want to summarize what we have heard. So we have heard about challenges Canada faces in achieving the SDGs, particularly when it comes to poverty, housing, food insecurity, Indigenous and racialized communities, gender-based violence, and the overall disparities that cut all across. We've talked about education and the role that that plays. We have talked about intentional consultation that Kate brought up. We have talked about kinship and disrupting systems that don't work and putting people in the center. We have talked about collaboration. We have talked about inclusivity. And I think the stark reality that hits me from these conversations is that Canada has made progress. For sure, people have made progress, but it is not uniform. And that is the frustration and the problem that we face. I look at this panel and the diversity on the panel, and I see where the issues are. So really, we must redouble our efforts to ensure that the most vulnerable are with us. They're not left behind, and we move beyond jargons to innovative solutions and practices that show us the path forward. So I'm going to look at some of the questions on the side. So we have a comment that says that we also need to explore ways to effectively utilize the expertise of GBV experts who have fled their home countries and are now residing in Canada, ensuring their skills and knowledge contribute to local and global GBV advocacy and support initiatives. So thank you so much, Asha. That's a really good addition to the discussion. Are you comfortable enough to unmute yourself and maybe share this with the group yourself with the mic on, and perhaps some panelists can weigh in on this?
Yeah, thank you so much for giving me the space. I wasn't expecting this. I thought I would just drop in my comment here and give my comment. Maybe you will allow me to also turn on my video. Yeah, I don't know if you can see me. Yeah,
we can.
Okay, thank you so much. Myself, I'm a GBV expert with 14 years experience. I'm right now living here in Edmonton. And prior to coming here, I had worked on GBV for the past 14 years. I'm a human rights lawyer. I had provided legal aid to thousands of women. And because of the work that I was doing, I became a target of abuse. And out of the 14 years that I provided legal aid and worked on GBV, I was abused for 13 years. So you can imagine, but I didn't tire. Prior also to coming here, I was working I was a regional master trainer of sexual and gender-based violence with the Regional Training Institute. I can always share it in the chat, and it works with 12 countries within the Great Lakes region. So in regard to my comment, when people like us come here, definitely we have quite a lot of expertise. We have a lot of experiences that we are coming with from home. And then looking at the SDGs, looking at Canada's gender foreign policy, definitely we have a lot that we can bring on table. But you realize that human resource like myself, and there are so many other ushers out there within Canada, but we are redundant and they're not taking advantage of people like us. So for you who are already in the movement, I think it is important if you come across people like us. I'm not asking for a job, but it is important you take advantage of people like us. Myself, I have provided legal aid. I have worked with faith-based organizations. I just know what it means to be a victim of abuse, but also to be a survivor, to be a service provider like I was. But I am here and nobody reaches out for me, and even those ones who know that I'm actually available. And I'm not the only one. There are so many ushers there. So it is very important, like I have made my recommendation here, reach out for people like us, bring us on board so that, because if we are looking at working against gender-based violence, both within Canada and out of Canada, it is a collective movement of all of us. It's not just a one-person problem. So thank you so much for giving me the space to speak to you guys. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Asha. And I think you've brought light to harnessing the skills of immigrants that we bring in, not only on GBV, but on many other issues. And it's a widespread issue. I think you've also shed light on like the resilience people that are coming in the country bring with them for their people who have met loss but are not defeated and are ready to contribute to this country even more. So I'd like to invite our panelists, anybody who feels like they can respond to Asha's observation or maybe comment on what we can do to make things better.
I'd love to jump in here because I think, Asha, this is a very important point that you made in two directions. One is the recognition of foreign degrees and recognizing in more creative ways than we have done so far, recognizing the expertise of the people that are coming into the country. There's certainly a room to improve and to actually work with the people that are already on the ground, whereas we're always on the search for those skilled immigrants, and we kind of underestimate who we already have in the country. And at the same time, bringing the perspectives of different countries into the work, and not only in gender-based violence, but also in other areas, to bring the expertise, the international expertise that we do have here in Canada, and making this work to serve our very diverse population on the ground. And also, if we're staying with gender-based violence as the core topic here, making more understood where it reaches into, because GBV is also a huge issue in access to education, because it so tremendously affects confidence, self-understanding. So future path of someone is really affected. So and thank you so much for the comment. I really found it extremely valuable to advance the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Katrin. Anybody else want to comment on this? Okay, is there anybody in the audience with another question, perhaps? Please don't be shy. Feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and go with it. We're monitoring the chat for any other questions. And while I wait for this, I'd like to invite any of our panelists to just reflect on any good practice perhaps that you've seen to make use of immigrant skills who are already in Canada? If you can think of something, because I think it's aligned with what Asha raised and so many other immigrants face. Any project, any initiative that you have seen that comes to mind, it would be great for the audience to know.
I don't think it's necessarily just trying to connect immigrants or newcomers to opportunities here, but I can reflect on the work that Community Foundations of Canada does, philanthropic organization that really is about community. It really is about not only amplifying what is happening in community, but also connecting community with progressive movements or progressive actions, especially around economic engagement. So I know personally that Community Foundations of Canada has supported youth of African descent from my organization, trying to connect them directly, especially around digitization and upskilling, and also really pushing forward on the social finance framework, where a lot of the times the challenges for organizations is really accessing financing for the different projects that we do, and you know, Community Foundations of Canada is playing in multiple sectors, you know, multiple connecting networks or intersecting networks, and that might be a place where people can look at their good work, because they're not only doing the knowledge mobilization, they're doing the social connections, as well as they're really advancing the social finance necessary to do good work here in Canada.
Thanks so much, Candice. I see another comment in the chat that says, "Hi everyone, thank you for the insightful presentation. In the context of Sustainable Development Goals, how can Canada enhance its efforts to address gender-based violence, particularly by ensuring equitable access to resources and support for vulnerable populations, such as immigrants, Indigenous communities, and individuals in remote areas?" So I think we can have a very short response by Kate, and then if somebody has an interjection, great, and then we will move towards calling for a break. Over to you, Kate.
Thank you. Thank you for your question. I know bits and pieces about this. Actually, growing up, my mom worked in a transition home for women. And I know in the Arctic in particular, there is a shortage of transition homes for women facing abuse, and also for men facing abuse as well. I think a part of this issue when it comes to combating GBV is we only have like half the conversation predominantly on like women intervention and getting ways out, and not teaching our men and gender diverse folks to walk in a good way as well, not to harm each other. I think is something that we need to work on for sure. I think when it comes to equitable resources as well, like just listening to the stories my mom used to tell of, you know, only providing women and children like 30 days in their services is an issue, because it does go back to the cycles of abuse, and usually it takes 7 times to like end a abusive relationship. And so like only helping women and children escape violence for a small period of time without providing adequate resources on next steps is an issue. And that we don't really understand, I don't think completely, on complete like cycles of abuse and why folks continue to go back. And that makes my heart really sad, and I've witnessed that myself. And I think providing more wraparound services is important, as well as like holistic, like looking at people as a whole being, and being able to assert their sovereignty and their needs is really important, as well as destigmatizing, I think, is a really big one as well, of like being really open about the traumas that folks have faced to really meet people where they're at. And also like making sure family support workers and social workers have the tools that they need to be able to do their jobs and not to create more harm in community.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Kate. I have now that time's done, we're getting more and more comments, and I just want to share with everybody that the email addresses of all the panelists are available in the bio document that was shared in the chat before. So if you want to get in touch directly with somebody that's on the panel, you're able to do that. I will close this panel now with a deep and big thank you to all our speakers for their time here today and everybody who has attended this. We will move to our second panel in a few minutes, which is more explicitly talking about gender-based violence and how do we ramp up progress against gender-based violence in Canada and what we can learn from other countries in that regard. So in these 10 minutes, if you want to be off camera, grab yourself a coffee, take care of yourself. We will push through the 3 hours without larger break. So please, this is the time for you for a bio break or grabbing a coffee. I will meanwhile move towards Annalie and see where Annalie has been up to with her graphic recording to just walk us through what we discussed in this session. Over to you, Annalie.
Hello. Apologies for the background noise. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to speak today, so this is great. So you'll see here that we have a really nice flowy little graphic with a focus over on the left where we started with kind of the holistic approach here, understanding that the SDGs actually do overlap and influence each other and impact each other, and it's all connected, essentially having a kinship approach. And we walk a little thread there as well, some of the areas where folks are working, such as connecting, bringing together education, work experience, teaching interconnectedness. We're talking about how food insecurity is not just about food, but also about all of the systemic inequities that cause people to have insecurity in the first place. So we had a lovely flowy discussion about that. There was an emphasis, as you can see at the bottom, about helping people feel actually connected to the SDGs, feel a sense of ownership and a sense that they're intended to meet their needs in their communities. And we wrap up over on the right with a bunch of excellent recommendations here, the idea that we should move towards implementation without leaving anyone behind. So I'm going to leave this up, or I'm going to find another way to share this screen so you can continue to sit with it if you like. And please feel free to add things in the chat or offer feedback or correct my spelling, whatever you want here. And thank you so much for having me.
Welcome back, everyone. It is my absolute privilege to introduce our opening speaker for our second panel, the Honourable Marci, who is the Minister of Women, Gender Equality and Youth. Minister Ian is a devoted mother, an award-winning journalist, an author, a member of Parliament for Toronto Centre, and a federal cabinet minister who has dedicated her life, at least publicly, I'm sure she has some private time that she keeps to herself, to providing a voice for those who need it most. Minister Ian was born in St. Jamestown and raised in Toronto, where she lives with her children, Blaze and Dash. The minister has seen firsthand the opportunities and challenges that Toronto as a city and that Canada as a country face. She is a passionate advocate for the most vulnerable communities in Canada and around the world. Today, she serves as our Minister for Women and Gender Equality and Youth and continues to fight each day for inclusion, equity, and ensuring that everyone in Toronto Centre and across Canada has a fair chance of success. On a personal note, one of my favorite moments with the minister was during the introduction of some funding for a program we were receiving, where I got to spend some time with both her and her son Dash. And I will say that it was a remarkable and wonderful moment to witness the minister passing on her knowledge and her wisdom in a very real and visceral way to her children. And that is so much about what we need to be doing in the world. I don't think it's a coincidence that women live longer than men. I think that our society needs us around longer to pass on that valuable knowledge. So, Minister, thank you for being with us today. And we look forward to having you open this second and most important panel as part of this event.
Amy, thank you so much. And it's great to see you. It's great to see all of you. But before I begin, I want to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations, with special recognition to the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. So pleased to be alongside esteemed panelists Gary and Nyadza and Gumunjanda and Cora and Anurada and Dugal and Yusra and for today's discussion. It's my honor. So we're connecting today because you know that true and lasting gender equality is only really possible when women, girls, and 2S LGBTQI plus people are safe. And that means that they are safe in their workplaces. It means they're safe on their campuses, in their communities, and safe in their homes. Gender-based violence, or GBV, continues to be a persistent problem across Canada. And it's one that takes a physical, psychological, financial toll on survivors, on witnesses, and on children. And while violence affects people of all genders, ages, religions, cultures, ethnicities, geographic locations, socioeconomic backgrounds, populations more at risk of GBV include women and girls, Indigenous peoples, 2S LGBTQI plus and gender diverse people, and women living in northern, rural, and remote communities, as well as women living with disabilities. And we see it in the numbers. So I'm going to break down a couple of sobering numbers for you. On average, a woman or girl in Canada is violently killed every 2 days, and most often by an intimate partner. The data tells a different story, a story of mothers, sisters, daughters, friends, neighbors who aren't safe in their own communities and homes. Every year, the federal, provincial, and territorial governments in Canada spend billions on healthcare, justice, social system responses to gender-based violence. Most importantly, individuals experiencing GBV pay considerable direct and indirect costs in terms of opportunity costs and impacts throughout their lifetimes and across generations. GBV doesn't just affect the person that is impacted directly, it has exponential impacts on family and friends, and it is quite the domino effect, and we see that. Breaking the cycles of violence demands a conscious effort and a sincere desire for change. Preventing violence before it happens is the first step in breaking those cycles. We want to prevent it before it happens. It's also a shared responsibility of all levels of government, community organizations like yours doing great work, experts, advocates, and others in the GBV sector. This includes downstream impacts of funding shelters, crisis centers, and culturally specific initiatives. Through the development of the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, there is a continued focus to close systemic gaps and, more importantly, address root causes, that prevention part, such as economic inequality, access to education, and the intersectional aspects of racism and sexism, because there are true intersections that we see in this work. It is up to all of us to build a safe and inclusive Canada. We must work together to shift the social norms, attitudes, and behaviors that perpetuate gender-based violence in the first place. I am more than proud to be here to show our government's continued support to Mothers Matters Canada. Over the years, your dedicated work, including Men Like Me project, reflects our shared commitment to ending GBV and achieving gender equality by addressing the root causes. I often say that I feel that I'm speaking to the converted. I'm speaking to rooms of women. I'm speaking to the choir. And it's important that men and boys are involved in this work. Women, by and large, are not hurting themselves. Men and boys have to be a part of this work in order to prevent gender-based violence. I applaud your work to empower refugee and immigrant men and boys through promoting positive masculinities. That's so important. And fostering allies in the effort to prevent and address gender-based violence. Amy talked about my son. Dash is 13 years old now. And, you know, just little things like him knowing that it's okay to show emotion, and it's okay, more than okay. In fact, he should cry when he wants to, that it's not a weakness. These are societal things that we need to do, work we need to do with our boys when they're young, so they understand what it means and what masculinity means. So important that we're not leaving our men and boys behind in these crucial conversations and programming. They play critical roles as allies in preventing gender-based violence and really achieving gender equality. The two go hand in hand. That's why the 16 Days of Activism Against Gender-Based Violence campaign theme is Come Together. All of us come together, act now, and emphasizes how crucial it is to involve everyone in Canada, particularly men and boys, in changing social norms, attitudes, and behaviors that contribute to gender-based violence. The campaign, which started Monday and runs until December 10th, is also a call to action, urging all of us to recognize the signs, not turn a blind eye to gender-based violence. It is our business if we see a neighbor or know of a neighbor being hurt or a friend being hurt, to reach out, to offer support for ourselves and our loved ones, our community members. Here are some of the things that our government is doing to support gender-based violence. The It's Time, Canada's strategy to prevent and address gender-based violence, supported by investments of more than $800 million to support actions and initiatives that prevent GBV and support victims and survivors. Through this strategy, my department created the Gender-Based Violence Program to support organizations working in the GBV sector in developing as well as implementing promising practices to address gaps in supports for Indigenous and underserved groups of survivors in Canada. The program has provided more than $325.1 million directly to organizations, and that's important, to grassroots organizations like you on the ground doing this work every day to prevent and address GBV. Endorsing the federal, provincial, territorial, national action plan to end gender-based violence that is supported by an investment of $525 million over 4 years for provincial and territorial governments to create or enhance existing services and supports within their jurisdiction. And launching Wages, It's Not Just, national campaign where I visited universities across the country to increase youth awareness of gender-based violence, build knowledge, and ultimately shift beliefs and actions to disrupt this cycle of violence too many Canadians experience. So that it's not just meant, it's not just social media, or it's not just a remark or an insult or casual. To really hash out what gender-based violence is and what it means and the impacts that it has with our young people across this country. Listen, make no mistake, we still have a long way to go, but I do believe that we're moving in the right direction. Thank you to all of you, the incredible individuals, organizations here today, for your dedication and meaningful contributions. Your work is making a difference. I see it across the country. I also know that it's the kind of work that you don't just leave at the door after you come home and say, that's it, I'm turning it off. It's the kind of work that stays with you. So I encourage you to take care of yourselves, to make sure that you're getting what you need in order to do this important work, because you can't be there for others if you're not taking care of yourself and doing that in a fulsome way. So I urge you to get the support you need if you need it, because you're doing amazing and important work. Let's just remember that ending gender-based violence isn't just a goal, but it really is what I would call a collective journey, a journey fueled by resilience and fueled by hope and the unwavering commitment to a safer, more equitable world. And on that note, I'll hand things back over to Amy. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you again for being here, Minister Ian, and right back at you. You have chosen, as a current vocation, a profession that has faced increasing violence, increasing difficulty, and increasing attacks on your integrity and on the amazing work that you're doing. So we all applaud you here for that choice that you're making every day. Please keep making it. We need you. We need more of you. And so please take care of yourself so that you can continue to take care of us and those who are the least able to take care of themselves. So thank you so much for your presence both here, but as a public leader in Canada. It is my absolute privilege to introduce your moderator for this next session. And I'd love to welcome Amy Jo, who is the project coordinator for program innovations at Mothers Matter Canada. I will say before Amy introduces herself that I think all of us often think if only there were two of me in my organization, I could just get significantly more done. Well, I am incredibly lucky to have a second Amy who is a powerhouse in terms of leadership and organization. And we are so lucky to have you not just moderating this next panel, but Amy was the power from behind this entire event, who has absolutely made this possible. Amy, just before we start on with your introductions and with this next panel, I'd love it if we could take Amy and I, both the Amy's, off of the spotlight or unpin us, and we might be able to do a group photo with all of those in attendance with Minister Ian as we go. So if everyone who is comfortable can put their cameras on, we'd love to do that, and we'll get that going. And I'll look to Ruth to let us know when that's been accomplished.
Hi guys, thank you so much for turning your cameras on. So yes, as Amy said, if you feel comfortable with your picture being on the minister's social media page, feel free to turn your camera on, and I'll count us down and get ready to smile. Okay, 3, 2, 1, smile. Awesome. Thank you so much, guys, and thank you, Amy.
My pleasure. All right, Amy Jo, over to you.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you so much for your kind words. Hi, everyone. I'm the other Amy, as Amy mentioned, and I want to thank you all for joining the Gender-Based Violence Ramping Up Progress panel. Gender-based violence remains alarmingly prevalent in Canada, with over 1 in 4 women having experienced intimate partner violence in their lifetimes. But these are not just numbers. These are real people, real women and girls that matter. Sadly, this crisis disproportionately affects refugee, immigrant, and Indigenous women, revealing deep systemic inequities. Achieving gender equality and eliminating gender-based violence are vital steps towards building a healthy and sustainable future. And I'm proud to be one of many on the journey to shape this future at Mothers Matter Canada by leading the Men Like Me program. As the Honourable Minister Marci Ian has so kindly spotlighted our Men Like Me program, I want to share more about this 30-week initiative designed for newcomers, refugees, and immigrant fathers operating across 6 sites in Edmonton, Yellowknife, Saskatoon, Regina, and Toronto. Men Like Me encourages participants to reflect on their identities as men, fathers, and partners. By fostering healthy mindsets, Men Like Me encourages fathers to embrace their roles as active and engaged fathers and partners, strengthening their bonds with their children and taking on shared parental responsibilities. Through the exploration of positive masculinity, participants are inspired to challenge stereotypes, build equitable relationships, and step up as allies in the fight against gender-based violence. Beyond Mothers Matter Canada's role in shaping the future, I'm honored to introduce our esteemed panelists who also each play a unique role in shaping the future. Aline Nizagama, Anuradha Dugal, Yusra Kadir, and Gary Baker. They will explore the successes and challenges in gender-based violence programming and share solutions to dismantle stigma and stereotypes around gender-based violence. The panel aims to inspire actionable strategies to break the cycle and accelerate progress in gender-based violence prevention. So I'll let the speakers start off with a round of introductions, starting with Aline Nizigama, who is the CEO and of YWCA Canada. I think you're muted, Aline.
How about now?
Great.
Okay, so I'm just gonna have to change a little bit my setup. Sorry about that. Thank you so much, Amy, for that introduction. So I am Aline Nizigama. I'm joining you today from Toronto, where I am the CEO of YWCA Canada. We are the oldest and largest gender equity advancing organization, having been around for 150 years, or over that, actually. And I'm joining you from Toronto on Treaty 13 traditional lands. And I'm really, really happy to be here today. And I look forward to participating in the discussions. Just really briefly, I am also a mom of two young kids. And also a stepmom to two younger adults. And so very much looking forward to discussing about how that shows up in my work as well. And yeah, but on my my day-to-day, I get to lead a federation of 29 local YWCAs across 9 provinces and 2 territories, where we work in community to ensure that women, girls, and gender diverse people experiencing abuse, poverty, and homelessness can access services where, when and where they need them the most. And so we run the largest network of domestic violence shelters in the country alongside Women's Shelters Canada. And we are also the largest provider of permanent affordable housing for women and girls and gender diverse people in the country. So I look forward to talking about how that all that contributes to the discussion we're having today. Thank you.
Thank you, Aline. I'll move on to Anuradha Dugal.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's so nice to be on this panel with such esteemed guests. I've been with Women's Shelters Canada. I'm currently the Executive Director for just over 3 months after 17 years at Canadian Women's Foundation. I have over 25 years experience going back to when I first arrived in Canada, supporting women, children, and gender diverse people fleeing violence. Women's Shelters Canada, just for those of you who maybe are not so familiar, we are a national unified voice for shelters and transition houses, providing advocacy and information research, particularly to the federal government, on a variety of issues related to violence against women and gender-based violence. And we leverage the expertise of our member organizations, 16 provincial and territorial associations, to support survivors and influence policy, ensuring that there are comprehensive, the kinds of responses that Minister Ian mentioned and Aline also mentioned, ensuring that those comprehensive responses to violence are available to support survivors all across the country. I'm also a director on the board of the Canadian Femicide Observatory for Justice and Accountability and a member of the South Asian Women's Community Centre of Montreal, which is where I live on the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka. Today I'm in Ottawa working on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe, and this is largely thanks to the incredible support that I'm able to do this work from my partner and also my 3 sons, aged 21 to 15, who are all feminists and activists in their own ways and in their own ways of expressing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Anuradha. And we have Gary Barker, the CEO and president of Equimundo.
Hey, everyone. Thanks for this invitation. I'm honored to get to be part of this conversation with you. I'm founder and CEO of Equimundo. We partner in about 20 countries to break cycles of harm and promote cycles of care among boys and men. We do a combination of research, carrying out some of the biggest studies around the world in where men are on gender equality and what breaks cycles of violence. We do programmatic work in about 20 countries. Some of that is father and parent training, work with young men and boys, work with men in workplaces. And we also do a number of advocacy campaigns, one on healthy boyhoods, one on engaging men to be hands-on caregivers, and a lot of work increasingly online, where we're seeing lots of cycles of harm promoted, not enough care promoted. I come to this work from my own personal experiences growing up. I am based in Washington, D.C., originally from the U.S. I witnessed lethal violence by a young man in my high school. My university residence, there was an act of sexual violence carried out by a group of young men. And I've been moved and felt a moral and ethical and political obligation to be part of this cause. The colleagues that we align with are often, in most countries, they're the women's rights partners who have been leading this work for decades. And we do all of our work around men and boys in partnership with key feminist leaders and women leaders who have been doing this work. So I look forward to chatting with you more.
Thanks so much, Gary. And lastly, we have Yusra Kadir, the Chief Programs and Advocacy Officer at Mothers Matter Canada. Now, you've heard her biography from the previous moderation, but Yusra, please feel free to add more about yourself if you would like.
Thanks so much, Amy. And it's really lovely to be part of this panel with this group of experts. I'm a mom of two boys, aged 9 and 11. I am 5.5 years old in Canada. So it's been, when I arrived, my kids were, one was preschool and one was in grade 1. So it's really been a ride. My academic background is in human rights and sociology, and I came to this country with experience of working with the United Nations on innovation and social inclusion. And I've had the privilege and opportunity to work in various countries in the global south at the front lines, especially with populations that are impacted by conflict, are displaced, or refugees. And I've been very lucky to continue some of the international development work while I've been in Canada, and I have been pleased to make the contribution I've been able to the Mothers Matter Canada, where I'm incredibly lucky and privileged. I feel that I am able to undertake work that is my passion. So my job and the work that I feel is my calling are the same. Uplifting women, especially those that are vulnerable and marginalized, enabling environments for mothers so that we can not only harness the potential of children, but also of the mothers themselves, and create more equitable and just societies and systems. So I look forward to contributing to the panel today.
Thank you, Yusra. And seeing as how all of our great panelist speakers today have so much experience just working in gender equity and gender-based violence prevention, we've all seen programming on gender-based violence has been ongoing for a long time. So there's been some gains, but progress has been slow. So why do you think the progress is slow, and what stands in the way? Who would like to start?
I can go. I can get us started. Yeah, so that's such a great question, Amy. And there's been a lot of progress, and it's good to recognize that. And as at YWCA Canada, one of the big things that really informs all the work that we do is that it has to be, everything that we're doing has to be multi-sectoral and coordinated and systemic in how we are addressing gender-based violence. And not to repeat some of the statistics that the minister cited, the fact that in Canada, a single woman, a woman or a girl is killed every 48 hours, it's just jarring in a country like ours. And we know that on top of that, Indigenous women and girls are 4 or 5 times likely to be victims in those statistics. And so, and another statistic is that a total of something like 868 children were left without mothers in 2022. This is something that you would know, I knew, and as part of your work as well. And I think a number of us here on the panel. So recognizing that ending gender-based violence is closely linked to issues of social and economic order, YWCA Canada works within a model that adds additional services in all of our approaches, not just as the largest provider of housing, but also largest provider of employment and counseling services to women in Canada, including things like upskilling and reskilling and employment training. And in addition, we're also the second largest provider of childcare in the country. And so all those things are things that didn't emerge by accident. It's the things that it's the aspects of lives that affect people who are fleeing violence, and in terms of the services and needs that they come with when they come to our services. And so although we welcomed the country's national action plan to end gender-based violence, and acknowledging that we also played a big role in shaping the plan, we also acknowledge that it took a very long time to come. It took decades of advocacy for Canada to adopt that national action plan, and just a lot of relentless effort from a number of organizations that were already serving communities in need. And so other factors to me that emerged include things like we need to continue raising awareness of gender-based violence and violence against women, as well as the available crisis supports that exist in community. And we have to continue to also denormalize violence. I think we need to talk about how that's not okay. There's no statistic that's going to make it normal in terms of the deaths that we continue to see. And in addition, we also have to acknowledge that there are gaps in how we address trauma, or we have informed services that are based on the trauma, especially for communities that have intersections of needs like newcomers and youth. And so we need specialized mental health supports that are in addition to how we're addressing the violence. And we are seeing trends that are quite worrisome in how we are defunding some services. So I think all those things really point to ongoing needs that continue to affect the fact that it's not enough yet what we're doing. So in essence, I'm going to finish by saying that having a system that continually conducts, and I know our federal government is doing some work around here, gender-based analysis, plus on all aspects of life, including housing, justice, social and economic policies, to reduce gender-based violence and the intersections in terms of the inequities that we continue to see. Thank you.
Thank you, Aline. Definitely the intersectional factors, especially in basic needs, really does prevent people from getting the great supports that they might need. And I'm so grateful that YWCA and all of the great organizations that all of our speakers work at today is able to provide resources and support, whether that be for housing, employment training, or mental health support. So thank you. Anuradha, would you like to add on?
Yes, I would add 3 main points to that. I think that my first point would be that violence and the sorts of power and control that we see in abusive relationships are based on generations of patriarchy, misogyny, colonization, and all of this connects to women's rights. And so the lack of rights protections in that our rights are still consistently threatened even now mean that even as we make progress, such as the National Action Plan or things like the Coercive Control Bill or domestic violence leave, we're seeing progress, but we're also seeing things that are holding us back related to systemic realities and obstacles that are put in the place of real progress. So that's one point. The second point I would say is that we need to see a continuation of the very serious ways to address violence against women and gender-based violence by declaring it an epidemic everywhere. If we declare it an epidemic, we recognize that it needs a public health response. And if it gets a public health response, it gets consistent policy, attention and funding related to turning back a serious concern that affects almost half the women in Canada. I want to see that everywhere. And I think the funding that would come with that, or that we hope would come with that, would realize some of those really important social supports that are essential and need to be addressed. And finally, I would say, you know, we have great ambition, and I think that's really important. But I know that organizations like YW have been around for much longer. But the first women's shelter for abused women was opened in 1973 in Toronto. They've been around for 50 years. When you balance that 50 years of progress against the 100 years of misogyny, I think we can say, yes, we are making progress. I agree that our ambitions must be high, and I agree we must continue to push and not accept any of the rollbacks for women's rights that we are seeing. But I also want us to hold hope that we can continue to see, imagine what the next 50 years could be if we do actually see something like the epidemic level of funding and support to turn this issue around.
Thank you, Anuradha. I absolutely agree. We definitely need to label it an epidemic. And I love the spirit that you have. Like, we have to keep doing the great work that we're doing, and we have to keep marching on to support everyone. And Gary, would you like to add, like, from your perspective?
Sure. You know, and I want to enter on the word epidemic, because I think, you know, in addition to calling it what it is in terms of the scale, I also think we have to call it what it is in terms of who it is that's carrying out violence against whom. We are almost always talking about men's violence against women. Femicide, the vast majority, is male partners. And the physical violence in the homes that we're talking about, the vast majority is male partners. Sexual violence that we're talking about is almost always men, sometimes partners, sometimes not. In our expression, gender-based violence makes a lot of sense to use, but it doesn't talk about it kind of masks that aspect. We know a lot about which men carry out violence, and I think we've been reluctant to take that research and turn it into evidence-based programming. We know that men who witness violence growing up and experience it growing up, who have other adverse childhood experiences, are 2 to 3 to 4 times more likely to use violence against a female partner of multiple kinds. Those are similar set of factors go into which men use certain forms of sexual harassment and sexual violence. It's simple to put it that it is harmed men who harm others, but it also needs unpacking to look at that, because that is essentially one of the issues that we have to look at. There's huge issues around power, the economic and social and political power that men have, how that matters at the household level. But we do have to dive into the harmed childhoods or the adverse childhoods of boys and men if we want to really think about prevention. So I bring that up because often our prevention with men and boys is sort of, let's assume all men are the same. And our campaigns often feel flat and sort of blanket for all men, when the men that we most need to look at are those that have, when we've talked about intersectionality, kind of intersecting factors that may lead them or that contribute to their use of violence. We know that having men who are aware that they will be held accountable, so breaking impunity, is hugely important. That is a start. The other we have to look at, Aline, you brought up trauma. We know, and there's some evidence, that trauma-informed approaches that focus on boys and girls who have some of these adverse childhood experiences can be more effective, and particularly those that make special effort to engage men, because boys and men are far less likely to acknowledge trauma, harm, violence they've experienced. Looking upstream to think about hotlines where men can reach out when they feel they may be emotionally distressed. Some of those could be combined with suicide hotlines. The city of Bogota in Colombia created the Línea Calma. Instead of calling it the hotline, they called it the calm line, a space for men to go for multiple kinds of help. We know that there's some school-based programs that do targeting, that understand young people who may have experienced or used bullying or had relationship violence in their teenage relationships, may be more likely later on to use violence. A program called Expect Respect in the US has done that and found good outcomes. Amy, I know that at Mothers Matter Canada, you do parent training. We found in many countries that's a very important one. The stress around particularly a first child, but not only, is sometimes a factor in a cycle of violence, either beginning or re-beginning. And so the importance of not only remodeling positive couple relationships, but also acknowledging men's stress, confusion, in that moment of becoming a parent. And I think all of these need to be thought of as kind of plus, plus, plus. The challenge with, we are resource starved in this space. And of course, we've got to start with a focus on survivors as we look at where resources go. To do this well, we have to say we also need prevention resources. And those often have to be separate, or we have to make sure we are not taking away from the support for survivors as we resource prevention. And I think we need to acknowledge that for all the decades that we've called attention to this, very few countries have scaled up evidence-based prevention. So figuring out ways that we create the funding streams for that, acknowledging that there's a science of prevention that we need to draw on here. It's not just saying, hey, let's talk about men too. Let's bring everyone together. Yes, we need that, but really to say we've got evidence on the kinds of things that work. And all this work with men for us always must be combined with the efforts to empower women and girls, to make the physical spaces safe, the places they work safe, the public spaces they circulate in, home safe, et cetera, so that we're doing this work lined up. Often we'll say the work with men and boys sounds like it's a separate thing, but really the best that it works is our parent training, our father training includes mothers. The work with boys in school to promote healthy masculinity includes girls and acknowledges, and non-binary individuals, acknowledging how we're all part of making those norms. So +1 to the comments on, let's call it what it is. It's an epidemic. And we see cycles of harm that start with men. If we can talk about that without decentering the focus on women as survivors, we've got to go to scale and we've got to resource it. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary, for pointing out men and boys are not a monolith and that gender-based violence can happen at any stage, as you mentioned. Thank you so much for spotlighting the resources, working with young boys and also working with fathers at any stage in your lifetime. There's always time for change. And Yusra, a lot of our panelists have said some great things, so please feel free to add on. And I also want to ask you, what are the key needs and gaps that you face in your work? Have these changed over time, and how do we bridge them?
Thanks, Amy. I just want to reiterate that the progress is really slow. I was fortunate to be part of the official delegation that went from Canada to the Commission on the Status of Women last year, led by Minister Ian, and we learned that at the current rate, it will take 300 years for the world to achieve gender parity. That's far too long. We are too slow. I'd say the slow progress can be traced to both systemic barriers and cultural dynamics. For women who are survivors or victims, GBV is not just a personal issue, but one that is deeply embedded in broader societal structures that perpetuate economic vulnerability, racism, and colonialism. So I'm going to take the conversation a little bit downstream. So for an Indigenous mother, for example, they're facing intergenerational trauma that stems from the legacy of residential schools and forced family separations, and they're contending with personal violence, but also systemic violence of state policy that continue to undermine their families. And the result is a cycle where survivors of violence face further trauma when their children are exposed to unstable, unsafe environments that perpetuate cycles of abuse, as highlighted by my other colleagues. Immigrant and refugee women are faced with economic dependence on their abusers and an uncertainty in terms of their immigration status. So they may not report violence because it may lead to deportation or separation from their children. Underreporting remains rampant, and I just want to shortly highlight the limited funding and the overburdened social system, and thus the need for more holistic and culturally appropriate supports. I'm going to delve into key needs, and I think, yes, the key needs have changed over time because initially, support for GBV was seen as addressing immediate needs like shelter, legal protection, and safety. But as we understand the needs of intersectionality, a lot more. We understand that these women are often navigating a maze of complex systems ranging from immigration processes to child welfare systems, and all while dealing with cultural isolation and language barriers. So we do need, so I think that I would say is the key change that has happened. I'm going to highlight a couple of gaps quickly. So lack of culturally appropriate mental health support for both men and women. I think that's a really important one, because we need to look at long-term healing to support stronger families that can stay together, have stronger familial bonds, and for that, culturally relevant counseling can be a really key and instrumental tool. Another significant gap is the lack of support for children of immigrant and indigenous mothers. So these children who face domestic violence, they experience long-term trauma, as Gary pointed towards, that impacts emotional development and leads to the likelihood of higher intergenerational violence. So our job, I think we need to show up for these children. They don't need to pay the price for being born in a certain family. These women don't need to pay the price of enduring abuse in terms of their safety, their mental health, or their children's futures. So I think programming in schools that would address linguistic barriers and cultural disconnects and support meaningful connections is important. Last, I'd say economic empowerment is the elephant in the room. Mothers, women, survivors, even men, this is huge. So when people find themselves trapped in low-wage, precarious employment situations, this is a pressure cooker, right? And when it boils, the volcano is eventually going to erupt. We really need to make better connections with the job market and decent jobs. And this you would find at the root of many of the factors that drive GBV. So I'll stop at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Yusra. That was a lot of key needs and gaps that we do face in this work. Aline, would you like to add on?
Yes, but Yusra did a great job, and everybody else on the panel. I think a lot has already been said around the fact that the many of the gaps that we continue to see have to do with equity. It sounds like almost equity in funding and just continued care around these issues. I would say that from our experience at YWCA Canada, it has really been the misaligned funding models that tend to be project-based and not rooted in evidence sometimes. So that lack of sustainable, flexible, consistent funding for VAW or GBV organizations really means that you can't do much, and you're just really adding band-aid solutions to a big, deeply rooted wicked issue. So I think we can also name, again, in our work, we see a close connection between gender-based violence and housing and affordability. So those issues that you were talking about, and homelessness in general. So we know that many survivors and victims remain in unsafe situations because you don't have any other place to go, and that deepens what happens in those unsafe situations. And so another gap that I think is really evident in our work is how there also there's some so there are gaps, I would say, as well in referral mechanisms and how we provide additional services to support people who come in that crisis moment. And I was going to talk about preventative interventions targeting men and boys, but I think that's really well covered in very more nuanced ways by what Gary shared. And I'm so happy to hear that those kinds of interventions are starting to be normalized. And so yes, to more of that. As a mom of a 9-year-old boy who's very much, I can see how the systems that teach those toxicity in masculinity are still very much around in the gaming world, in the social interactions. And so we need to do more in schools and in all the spheres where our young men are engaging. So more in research as well to make sure we understand the emerging trends, and really the poor understanding in the public of these issues. I think a lot of people think that we've solved gender equity, and there's not a whole lot of like, why are we still complaining? But I think we need to continue to maintain a public education in all the new spaces where people are gathering. And to I share like my last contribution to this topic here on this question is that we need to depoliticize this issue. It's not a matter of being woke, or it's not a DEI issue, but even if those were, as if those were really bad words, it's about life or death for many people. And so we just need to make it to continue to drive home that message, especially for younger people. So we can't really rest on the laurels of what we've achieved. And to let the political news cycles also affect how we talk about these issues. So I think that is a really big need that I see in the current context. So fostering more opportunities for education, absolutely critical for different audiences.
Thanks so much for sharing, Aline.
But last thing that I forgot that I think Anna, maybe I knew maybe you're going to be talking about that is that we're talking about some of the gaps in how we offer services, is that we believe women in breaking that stigma, right? In breaking the stigma around these issues, is that our really low barrier services are premised on the fact that we believe anybody who walks into those doors saying, I am in need and here's my story. And that usually makes sure that you have more people accessing your services and feeling seen and feeling supported.
Thanks, Aline. Yes, it is so important to make victims and women feel like they are seen. It's just so incredibly important that their voices are heard and they're recognized, right? That they're understood and that they have someone to trust. Gary and Anuradha, did you want to add on to the question about key needs and gaps?
Thanks. I would just add, especially on the issue of believing women, we need a legal system that believes women. It's not enough to have a support system that believes them, but very often, especially the danger that women face when they are saying that they're at risk of lethal violence is minimized and dismissed by many, many different, let's say, authority figures, for want of a better word, but that might include lawyers, that might include police officers, that might include social workers, those things. And the reality is we know how to stop femicides. There's an awful lot of evidence base on what are the flags, what are the danger signs, what are the sorts of things we should be looking for, and then even in many ways, if things like protection orders were well enforced, we know how to protect women too. And I think I would take it back to that very deep misogyny that exists in our society, that we don't believe women. We think they're making it up. We think they're causing trouble. And I say we as in society, because I inherently never believe that, but I recognize that I'm part of this system that is putting women again and again in that situation. So I think that is essential to move on. And on the subject of femicide, I think we need very, very robust danger assessments. They exist. They are not always carried out. Safety planning is typically done, but danger assessments that assess the level of lethality that might be happening and the kind of abuse that we know is directly associated with femicide. So abuse to property, abuse to animals, abuse and coercive control. All of these things are not, it's not actually somebody who is physically violent for many, many years who might suddenly kill a partner. It's actually someone who has used other forms of control and power that in that moment of leaving feels the control slipping away and reaches out to seize it back in an incredibly damaging and harmful way, as we've said, destroys families, destroys communities, completely upends what we believe we are here to do as human beings on this earth. So those things are really important, I think, to highlight. And that's why I think when we talk about prevention, which everybody has said things that I love to hear about prevention, things that are community-based, things that bring agency to a small community, whether it's a South Asian community, which I might be a part of, which includes religious leaders, which includes different community members in using their leadership position to say, we believe women, to say, we support women, to say, we will listen, and we're not going to tell you to go back to your family or try and make the most of it, or you married him, so you owe him everything. Whatever that script is in our heads that we still hear, we need lots of community support to say, actually, as a community, we stand against that. We don't believe in that. And that then it's less about bringing an external, especially again as immigrants, bringing an external majority community in to tell me what to do. And instead it's about, I get to have agency in my community and make a change for the better.
Thank you, Anuradha. So Gary, feel free to add on to what Anuradha had to say. But I also want to ask, because Aline and Anuradha had both talked about the stigma around gender-based violence and the fear of being perceived by others that you're not telling the truth, even though you are. What are some ways to break the stigma around gender-based violence, to encourage communities to seek the help they need to prevent and end gender-based violence? And can you also please share any good practice or innovations that you've seen on the ground to prevent GBV effectively?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I may also touch on the needs and the gaps. I think one comment I want to build on that was said before of kind of communities speaking out, and particularly men speaking out. If it is close to 1 in 4 men who have used or will use violence, it's 3/4 who haven't, and it's their silence that's often part of the problem. And I think, we know that whether that's couched in, so Amy, to your question about effective approaches, we know that bystander intervention approaches can work in some settings, particularly some male-dominated workplaces, male-dominated sports places, et cetera, where the importance of other men in that space, again, however your community is defined, men in that space saying this is not okay. What we do have to step in and say, it's not about, me using threats or kind of repeating violence by trying to convince you not to use it, that it's got to be trained and appropriate, where we basically pull the conversation down. We are trying to break cycles of violence, not by using violence. And so a lot of that is kind of stepped in of, I'm here to be the protector, and we reinforce the very version of manhood that we're trying to question. So, but thoughtful spaces where men can speak up, and not just I speak up about it in a public space when I feel safe, but to speak up. And so to your point on stigma, that I speak up in a space where it may cost me because my male peers don't want me to speak out, because we as men are taught, you don't question that powerful guy in the room. You don't question what your mates do. So I think one piece of stigma is that the kind of encouraging men and helping men with language in ways that we speak up when we see it, that we intervene in ways that are helpful and don't repeat cycles of violence, and that we see ourselves both personally and politically responsible for it. And another part on the need is to think about, and we could probably talk a very long about this, of the results of the US presidential election. We have a man found responsible for sexual violence and whose record on women's rights is atrocious. And we have an outgoing president who said the biggest success that he feels pride in his career was passing the Violence Against Women Act, and that he put 20 years of his career as a senator around passing that legislation, with both has legal protections for survivors, but also funds and includes work with men. So we're in a moment as well where we're saying, we kind of knew this could happen, but asking, what is it that we need to do so that men see themselves as responsible, and I would also say as beneficiaries of this work. And I wonder, we're doing a lot of, apart from the anguish that we're feeling, trying to step in and say, okay, well, how can we present this to men in a way that says this is not against men? In fact, we benefit from the stuff that we do to break cycles of violence against women. Physical public spaces that are safer for women are also places where men don't get mugged and robbed. Societies where there's equality, we tend to live longer and homicides lower. We know that femicide often clusters with male suicide and higher rates of homicide, which is mostly men's violence against men. So if we do gendered public safety well, men live better too. The mental health support that women survivors need, men need in different kinds. So, but we've had trouble breaking that stigma as well, that men who may use violence need help, and how we get them to feel like they can seek that help. The economic precarity that leaves women fragile to violence is also a huge source of stress to men who think their only role is to be a provider. So we've got to both talk about the manhood, but we've also got to talk about how it is that economic precarity for him, and we can name the groups that we have before, recent immigrant groups, historically marginalized groups, where economic precarity is extremely acute. So I think we've got to be really creative in this moment. And I'll stop there because I could talk a lot about that. It's been the anguish moment of us in the US at the moment of saying we've got to help men see that we are beneficiaries of a world where we live better, we love better, we treat each other better. We as men live better in that world too. Some massive marketing project on that. I think is so urgently needed.
Thanks so much, Gary. Yes, we all need to encourage men to be in this fight against gender-based violence. And a lot of these intersectional factors do impact men, especially economic precarity that we see so much actually in our Men Like Me program. Like a lot of the fathers stress that they are under stress because they're expected to be the provider of the family, right? And they're coming to terms that their wives may need to get a job in Canada, which is something they haven't faced before. So all of these things combined, there's so much stress going on. There's so much mental health issues that are going on with families and newcomer immigrants in Canada. So it's important to address these, and it's going to help everyone and society as a whole. Yusra, would you like to add on?
Thanks, Amy. So much has been said, but I'm going to try and augment it a little bit. I want to talk about weaponization of religion or culture. And I want to make a point that GBV is universal. It's not just, men of color or certain ethnic groups, because we tend to do that. We tend to do these generic labels, but violence is often normalized, and that's not okay. So it either, perpetuates violence under the guise of maintaining family honor or fulfilling cultural traditions, or by glorifying women who kept silent and endured the violence. So women feel significant pressure to stay silent because reporting violence might lead to social inclusion, disrespect, or the breakdown of the family unit. So I feel like there's a lot of expectation from women, and we cut out a lot more work to put on women's plates because we aren't engaging men as we should. Everybody is losing because of GBV, including men and boys, but we want women to identify the abuse, report the abuse, take action, plan safety, move out, take care of the children, and raise good children and keep the society going. So I think prevention is a huge thing we need to look at, along with survivor-centered services, of course. I think Anuradha talked about it. So I think many times the legal system that's meant to protect women can feel like a threat, because if women have a choice between leaving the abuser versus face homelessness, potentially lose their children to a very racist system, it's a hard choice to make. So I think trusted community-based interventions, like involving community leaders, elders, faith leaders, cultural mentors, that's really, really important. I will not talk more about the Men Like Me project, but I see a lot of the facilitators from the project online. So I hope people are taking away from this discussion things that will make the programs more successful. But I will leave three questions for all the community-based practitioners that are on this virtual event with us today, because if we can think through these three questions, in my opinion, we will arrive at a good practice. So the first one would be that how do we redesign our systems, even at a micro level, to ensure survivors, especially the most vulnerable ones, can thrive economically and socially after escaping violence? So that's one, like what do we need to do? Two, what would it take to engage men and boys as active allies? To change the harmful cultural norms, because men also want the best for their children. They also want stronger families. They want to enjoy the relationships that society puts, so much emphasis on. And then the third is that how can we really integrate services across sectors to better address the complex needs of women facing gender-based violence? So how do we break the housing camp and the shelter camp and the health camp and the education camp and all these silos? How do we break them, even at the most micro, at the project level? And I think there's things that we can do as practitioners in our everyday work that can answer some of these questions and convert our projects into good practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Yusra. Aline, I know that you did talk about ways of breaking the stigma, so please feel free to add on to that. But also please do share any good practice or innovation that you've seen work on the ground through your years of experience or at the Y.
Yeah, no, thanks, Amy. I think a lot has been said around the gaps and the work that still remains ahead to be able to wrap up our work in tackling gender-based violence. So I'll cite two examples of really promising work that is emerging from our YWCA work, and that are survivor-centric. I'm loving what I'm seeing in the chat space, that really amplifying survivor voices has been one of the best practices that we apply consistently in the work that we do. So one initiative was stemmed from the fact that survivors of gender-based violence frequently cited that not having enough money was one of the primary reasons that they stayed in abusive situations. So without the help to leave, in having fewer options available to protect you and your family, and which meant you were staying longer in those abusive situations or staying longer in emergency shelters because you couldn't afford anything else. So not having money to pay that first and last month's rent and those other expenses really meant that these families were staying in quite precarious situations for too long. So, which also affects the capacity in shelters to help more people, which is a really vicious cycle. Or having also children's aid societies and children protection services coming into that. So really just messy situations. So we took action by listening to survivors, and we created what we think was Canada's first national emergency survivor support fund. There had been iterations of that locally. So taking it national and working in 12 regions really has meant that we've helped over 800 women and families flee abusive situations and leave financially straining situations by giving them financial support with low barriers to leave those unsafe homes and sometimes leave emergency shelters or precarious housing situations and to begin their healing journey. And so it's been consistently a project that we started 2 years ago that is we're hoping to see be amplified across the country. And so the second initiative was the really tackling what I heard around the online violence challenge. And so as part of our work at YWCA Canada, we really try to tackle GBV in every form. And this means that we are looking at how it's merging and migrating to online spaces. And so we worked with youth and survivors across Canada to bring awareness and take action against online hate in a project that was called Block Hate, which was about building resilience against online hate and violence. that was funded by Public Safety Canada. And so out of that came really strong recommendations to and toolkits to help youth, specifically survivors, to strengthen their digital safety. And I know when I talk about some of that project, I don't want to put the onus of making sure you're safe in online spaces on people who are engaging in these spaces. But we really saw that, well, there's that need to help people level up their safety knowledge. But it's also a federal government responsibility to make sure that we have safer spaces that we engage in our online lives. And so there's a really big role so in our recommendations that came from that work, there were 4 areas of interventions, and the federal government having a key role in promoting online safety and addressing hate speech whenever it shows up in these digital spaces. It's not just speech, it's about the violence and the repeated nature sometimes that survivors have to go through. So really asking for introducing legislation and regulation to have a legal intervention as well in the digital space. Secondly, we talked about, and I think this is your point, Anu, but really as it refers to the online spaces, having those community-centric solutions that are also that trauma-informed approach and that intersectional feminist consideration. And I love how you said, Gary, that feminism, although it can be a big word, is really about creating absolutely positive and benefits that affect all men as well. It's about advancing all genders. So I love how we're starting to talk about that. The second and the third and last thing was about the fact that we need to not just recognize the individual harms, but also the systemic. So if something is happening to me, what does that mean to the community that I represent or the space that I occupy, and to the people who are looking at what is happening to me when I'm being harmed online? So addressing the individual, but also the systemic is humongous. But I think the biggest piece is also about the accountability framework that we have to have from the corporate sector to ensure that we have the right ways to report something that when it's not right, to have privacy when we choose to do so that our images are not shared without our consent, to have, yes, freedom of expression, but also have accountability about how we are talking about people or making it unsafe for people to show up in online spaces, which are supposed to be joyful places where we talk to family, we work, we express ourselves. So really allowing everybody in whatever makes them whole to express themselves and fully participate in these digital spaces. And that was particularly true for younger people, as we see that, by default, a lot of the safety and privacy features are not turned on. So we have to have that education to make sure that people are safer. And so those were the biggest things that we learned from this project. And out of that came a series of animated graphics that we shared on social media, just giving people tools and tips about how to remain safe, but also calling for greater accountability from the government, but also the online platforms, the Metas, the X's, the TikToks, the YouTube, all those places where we know that things are just not okay for a lot of people.
Thank you so much, Aline. I love the 2 initiatives you spotlighted, and I'm so excited to see these initiatives to be amplified. We do need a safe space on the internet, and we also need funds for people to flee from abuse. They're much needed initiatives, so thank you for your work on that. And Anuradha, I would love to hear the innovative practices or any good practices that you have at Women's Shelters Canada. And just keeping in mind time, I'm also going to tie in our last question, which is based on your experience, can you please offer tangible recommendations to ramp up progress against gender-based violence?
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, I think my main point on innovation is really building, well, adding to what Aline has said with an innovation at Women's Shelters Canada also about safety online. We run techsafety.ca, which is a national website in Canada, which is dedicated to offering support for anybody who is experiencing an abuser's misuse of technology to perpetrate violence against survivors, and specifically domestic violence. And of course, we know that in our world, we are more and more connected, more and more of what we are required to do, whether for our work, for our financial well-being, for housing, for banking, we require a device, and we require the ability to use that device safely. And so it's not appropriate anymore to tell people, young or old, to simply stop using their device, or to stop being online, or to shift away from whatever activity it is that they've been doing online. We need to take the emphasis right back to the abuse and take it away from the actual technology. And the way we do that is by making sure that people know, yes, how to use technology safely, and also making, again, the corporations aware of their responsibility to create protections online. So a couple of examples of things. So we've done an open letter on the use of Interact. People use Interact to abuse others using the chat function to send abusive messages and threats and harassment. And that's intimately connected to their financial well-being. So they have to take advantage of the Interact transfer, but they also have to face the abuse when they do that. So thanks to the work of Interact Canada directly, they've been able to offer the opportunity of severing that connection so that somebody can get the money they need without having to read the abusive message. As an example, though, nobody knows how to do it yet. So Women's Shelters Canada is developing a toolkit, another toolkit, to explain, and we'll be providing that on techsafety.ca, to explain how to make the most of these opportunities when there are companies that make themselves accountable and that acknowledge that there are things they could do to make technology safer for use. Another example I would highlight, and this is both a gap, an innovation, and a recommendation for future work. The Online Harms Bill is a bill that is currently making its way through the Parliament in Canada. And one of the things it's doing, which is a step in the right direction, is to saying that it's going to address harassment, threats, and non-consensual disclosure of intimate images in public-facing platforms. So anything that's shared, like comments or a post or a wall. What it's not doing is going behind the scenes and making companies take responsibility for things that are shared privately in DMs. And I'll give you an example as to why that's so important. These images can be used as threats directly, indirect messaging from somebody. And sometimes, yes, you can block that person, but sometimes you also need to have an ability to text that person, especially if it's your former partner who you share children with, because you can't block them. They need to tell you when hockey practice is. You need to find out what time to pick up the kids. Blocking them is not an effective way of dealing with that abuse online. So there have to be other ways that the companies will be able to trigger blocks and protections based on the type of language, the type of image, filters that we know algorithms out there are perfectly capable of filtering out. We need those kinds of protections also. And maybe they don't need to be available to everybody, but they need to be available in a trauma-informed way to those women and those survivors who say they need those protections. And I'll focus back to, we need to believe women. I've heard of many cases of women calling a bank or calling their telecom company saying, I'm in an abusive relationship. I need to sever the connection with this person. The person on the other end of the phone in customer service doesn't believe them, doesn't care, doesn't know what it means, doesn't have the list of interventions that that particular company can offer. All of those things are gaps that, again, private companies, as much as those of us who work in more public-facing or non-profit sectors, have to put into place. I think those are innovations and changes that can really make a difference. So Tech Safety Canada has a number of tools on the website. That includes the digital breakup tool. It includes a sort of assessment to find out if you really are experiencing tech-facilitated gender-based violence. There are key tools such as also home tech, right? A lot of us use home tech devices to turn lights on and off and to play music and to record shopping lists. Those devices can also be used for abuse. So another innovation is to find ways to let people know how you uncouple or decouple the passwords and the access that somebody who is abusive towards you has to those devices. Those are all available on techsafety.ca in the resource section. So I really recommend that anybody who is offering that or experiencing that or offering support to survivors take a look at that. Women's Shelters Canada knows that 95% of shelter workers have supported somebody who is experiencing tech-facilitated gender-based violence, and they're not all confident that they know exactly what to do. And that's why this website is so important, to make sure that they know exactly how to respond. So I had another one that I was going to suggest, but I will pause there because I know we are running out of time.
Thank you so much, Anuradha, for raising awareness on all the tech supports that are much needed in modern day today. And I'm excited to see what AI can do with the ethics and moralism of all of the integrations that are facing GBV prevention. So very, very quickly, Gary, Aline, and Yusra, could you just say in less than 1 minute if you can offer any tangible recommendations to ramp up progress against gender-based violence? I'll start off with Gary.
Sure, I'm going to step in on the online space because it is a locus of an increasing amount of violence, and I think it becomes almost a training ground in some ways for violence that can happen offline. Quickly, just to underline, yes, we've got to hold the tech world accountable for what happened. So there's nothing, we do have to do the legal, put legal guardrails in place and hold tech accountable in multiple ways. But what do we need to do to look upstream? We know that so much depends on the influencers and the streamers and the moderators that are in the spaces, particularly where men go, whether they're an echo chamber, whether they make violence in their comments, or whether they speak up against it. We've done some mapping on Twitch with the streamers where you're playing or you're watching another player. You may have 20,000 folks there. If the mostly male streamers make a sexist comment, racist comment, homophobic comment, it echoes throughout the chat. If they say positive things or they call out when they see some of their followers making comments, it dampens kind of how those messages power on through. So I think we do have to step in and acknowledge that there are influencers and moderators we can engage who want to be our allies. Most of the time when we reach out to them, they said, no one talked to me about this. We have not done in a big way efforts to say, we need you to be part of a safer space online. I think we also have to work with parents and teachers. The conversations we have, most of the time, parents and teachers are pretty internet limited. And I would even say if we think about the male-dominated spaces, this thing we call the manosphere, most of us above the age of 30 are pretty manosphere illiterate. So we got to do a huge amount of work just of understanding what's happening there. It's how it's happening. We spend a lot of time when we're building out a hub online of basically talking to parents about the trends online that you should know about. Your son may talk about X. Here's a way you may steer him to Y. If you don't even know what he's watching on X, you have no clue of what to do about that. School-based conversations around this have to be there as well. We also know that boys and young men experience a huge amount of cyberbullying. It's often homophobic in content or other racist and transphobic, et cetera. Getting young men to see we have a stake in ending that. And then finally, I'd say we also have to talk about, as we talk about gender-based violence and particularly sexual violence, the impact of porn, the conversations around porn that have to be there. We know how much early exposure and watching certain kinds and the lack of anybody who discusses with you creates a normality around certain kinds of sexual violence. So I think we also have to add that to our challenges of things to talk about. But I do want to say, I think there are things we can do in the online world where young men in particular hang out that help get to that primary prevention that we're after. So in addition to all that other stuff we have to do that I said at the beginning, those of us who want to break cycles starting in boyhood and young adulthood and young manhood have to think about the online work as well. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Gary. Aline?
Yeah, I'll take a second to just really talk about. I really love the work that is happening around the prevention and then supporting men and boys in all of these new spaces. I'm learning a lot. Thank you, Gary. It's really reassuring to hear the work you're doing. Again, I think a couple things for me. It's that we've talked about accountability across the board, but here in Canada, in terms of the implementation of the National Action Plan to End Gender-Based Violence, we are calling for the need to have more accountability and transparency about how the progress will be reported and how, over time, because it is an ambitious goal. But I think just making sure that those checkpoints, as we roll that out, will be inclusive and will be engaging for all the community sectors that's been working in this space for a long time is going to be critical. And last, I think for people experiencing gender-based violence, every day is an emergency, point blank. So the issue needs to be and to continue to be a priority for governments and for all the governments at all levels. So declaring intimate partner violence and gender-based violence an epidemic will get us there. And that's all I'm going to end with. And I'm reassured that this panel will help advance that conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Aline. Yusra?
Thanks, Amy. So we have a blog on moving the needle, which I would invite everybody to read. It's going to be, the link would be dropped in the chat any moment. So there's some mainstream ones like streamlining legal protections, simplifying access, increasing investment in country-specific activities, investing in prevention, and everything we've spoken about. But I want to talk a little bit of politics, taking this over from Gary. The right-wing and left-wing terms originated during the French Revolution in 1789, and the left was called the Party of Movement, and or liberals, and the right was called the Party of Order or conservative. So you know what? We need both. We need both the movement and the order together to prevent and end violence and make progress on GBV. The statistics are horrific. It's taking away the impact of GBV. It's taking away human capital. It's taking away the future of our children. It's taking away our tax dollars. So the gains and the losses, like, we need to politically understand that we need to move the needle, no matter whether we have a right-wing or a left-wing government. So Minister Ian started us off saying that the theme for the 16 days of activism is come together, act now. So really what we need to do is to understand that for issues like preventing and ending GBV or fundamental human rights issues, at least we need to tear down the divides, and suddenly everything would look different, right? So Anuradha, you talked about hope. So I think, if we tore this divide, we will all believe that climate change is real and is impacting GBV rates and intensity around the world. We would not have any angst on government changes, or the right or left wing winds blowing in the world. We will not be fearful of reversing hard-earned gains during certain government tenures, and we will not fear loss of funding that uplifts people. So for the National Action Plan that has now arrived, we'll still have, we won't be thinking whether it's going to continue to be funded or not. And lastly, Gary, I know you're US based, and we won't be, as Canada at least, thinking about how we'll be dealing with immigration from south of the border when elections happen. So, Gary, I don't know, we have some high skill streams coming up. Vancouver's a beautiful city. So I think my biggest tangible recommendation is the theme. It is the theme of the 16 days of activism. That is that we need to come together and act now as communities, as individuals, and as societies across the globe.
Thank you so much, Yusra. And we don't have much time, so I will just ask one question. Not everyone has to answer. That is from the comment section. So in my work, intersectionality was key understanding how factors like race, immigration status, and socioeconomic background impact GBV. I'd love to explore how Canada and key stakeholders like the organizations on the panel today integrate an intersectional lens in Canada's strategies to end GBV. Would anyone like to answer?
I don't mind starting us off. I'm guessing I'm just going to try and read it again. I think this is referring possibly more specifically to the National Action Plan on Gender-Based Violence. So I think there is, because it's a federal plan, even though what we presented, and there's a website called the National Action Plan, which provides a blueprint that was actually presented to the government. It was co-developed with a group of 50 kind of volunteers from the sector. We created a blueprint of what the National Action Plan should look like, including things like a panel of experts who would assess its implementation and make recommendations on its implementation. And the idea of that Council of Advisors was to consistently bring forward an intersectional analysis to the implementation of legal structures or funding offers or ways to support survivors, so that there was always a survivor-focused or even survivor-led, trauma-informed, intersectional analysis constantly from the field, from the ground up, being brought to the National Action Plan. The government chose not to do that. So we are already in a situation where the National Action Plan is not being implemented in an intersectional way. And secondly, the other problem is that we're not getting any kind of feedback on how it's being implemented, even though we've been promised it, which we then can't analyze in an intersectional and feminist way. So we're lacking information there to really understand the ways in which the government's plan could be more implemented in an intersectional way. We all have work to do. That's the other thing I would say. Every single organization in Canada needs to do better about their intersectional analysis and application. And I include Women's Shelters Canada in that. This is a framework that is complex and requires some very careful and deliberate, intentional attention to the ways in which all those intersections interplay. And that takes time. And unfortunately, we're also in a world that kind of requires us to move a bit too fast and deliver in a way that is detrimental to having that kind of careful consideration of this sort of planning and implementation. So I think we really need to do better is the really short answer. I'm sorry, that sounds very trite, but I think it's a process that we are still learning how to do. And I'll finish it off by saying, I know there are still organizations who really don't think the work needs to be intersectional. And I've spoken to some of those. And they believe that, if you cast the widest net, you'll manage enough people. And there's a sort of majority response that we want to be available to everybody, not we want to tailor our responses to specific communities. And I think that's a gap that I've seen.
Thank you so much, Anuradha. And for everyone in the chat, there are the contact information for all of these panel speakers. So if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to them to ask. And I want to thank Aline, Yusra, Gary, and Anuradha for joining me today for panel 2. We've heard about the intersectional factors that really inhibit the progress made on GBV prevention. And we've also heard that while there is work being done in GBV's prevention, there's still a lot that needs to be done in relation to tech support, in relation to finances, in relation to housing, shelter, food, all of these different factors. So I really thank you all for your time and bringing your expertise to this wonderful discussion. And I am going to bring it to Amy Robichaud, our CEO, to close the webinar. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. I will do a very quick closing. I did have some notes to summarize us all together, but instead, I'm gonna be respectful of everyone's time, and I'm gonna leave us with 3 things. One, I'm going to say that if you would like to revisit this event or to share it with others, we had some amazing content shared today. We'll be uploading a video of it to our YouTube channel that can be found in the Zoom chat. The other thing that I'd just like to share is that I would like to take a brief moment as we conclude to thank everybody who participated today. Of course, our panelists and our speakers, but mostly all of you who've attended to us today. We had over 100 people with us throughout these last couple hours. And this is the kind of community, the coming together that is absolutely required to change the world that we exist in. It's not enough to make it a little bit better. We really do need wholesale change. But seeing as what we can do and what we need to do are sometimes too far apart, I lastly want to leave us with a shameless plug for the Mothers Matters Canada's Bright Beginnings campaign, which is funding a pilot program whose support is concluding, that is in women's shelters across Canada, that is allowing for early childhood education as well as rebuilding parents' bonds and building safe communities for women who are in those shelters. We've seen 100% success rate for women who have been in this program in terms of leaving safely and remaining safely in the community away from violence, and the early childhood education program that it includes has 100% success rate of eliminating poverty in a family within a single generation. So we are running our Bright Beginnings campaign. There is a link that is being posted in the chat. As the pilot program for SELF concludes, and to learn more about it, you can visit it there. But together we know that all of us can rebuild trust, restore childhood joys, and make a lasting change for mothers and children who have experienced intimate partner violence. We know that preventing gender-based violence requires more than 16 days. We know that achieving sustainable development is going to take us longer than 2030. And yet what we know most of all is that it is a collective and ongoing commitment that is going to allow us to continue to work together to fundamentally change the parameters of the world we live in, where none of us are feeling harm from each other or experiencing it from ourselves. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your time, your contributions, for sharing your lived experiences and your professional experiences, and for taking it all in. Have the best afternoon and evening that's available to all of you. We look forward to collaborating again in the future. If you don't know where to reach Amy or Yusra or myself, we'll make sure that that's possible. Let's keep working together, and have a great day, everyone.